Why do you think the SBD training has become as popularized as it is?
The best female powerlifter in the world does it. 6 or 7 SBD sessions a week. For example, beautiful bench, beautiful squat, beautiful deadlift. Everything is technically pristine. We're pushing that much frequency and that much volume. The system's perfect. Someone else who tries to do that, they have suboptimal technique. They have deviations rep to rep. That's where these issues start to come in.
Time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. Okay, we're just going to jump off to what we were just talking about. So you started training with Westside for Skinny Bastards because of Brian Cushing.
Yes.
Right? So elaborate, because I was into the conversation before we had to stop to do this.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I was super undersized in high school, right? And I had made this determination kind of at the end of my sophomore season. I was like, I want to go play in university. Probably not going to play. And my dad had made me do manual labor that summer. So I think I came back for my junior season at probably 165 pounds. And I was like, and I had a really good junior season. But, you know, if you're 6 foot and 165 pounds, that does not a good linebacker make.
Yeah, I was going to ask what position.
Yeah. And so I was like, all right, well, I got to get fucking big. And so I looked up like how to get big for football. That's the first thing that comes up. So I ran Westside Barbell for Skinny Bastards. I think so I started doing that in the 11th grade. By the time I went off to college, I was 230. So I went from 165 to 230 in probably 2 years.
So how did that impact your performance on the field?
You know, what's the funny thing is, had I known now, or had I had the information I have now, then I think the primary mistake that I made was I was so focused on just being as strong as humanly possible that I got stiff, which is why I actually ended up having to move the defensive line, because I just didn't have the hips to cover anymore.
Yeah.
So
I had a somewhat similar experience where it was between my sophomore and junior year. I put on like 30 pounds, you know, squat goes up, powerlifting kind of came more into the picture. 40 time went down, everything else went down. I was way stronger than everybody else on the field, right? So I'm just throwing people around. Problem happens when you get across from a competitor that's not as strong, but better skilled.
Yeah.
They use that against you.
100%.
So that's why I asked that question, like, how did that transfer over, you know, to what it was? So oddly enough, I went from defensive end to offensive tackle.
Yeah.
You know, so, and it was a wide out end, you know, so it and interesting because that's how the coaches handled that, right? Where I like the end position way better, you know, but you get moved in. But anyhow, so that happens, but it took you into college.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I mean, it was absolutely incredible. You know, I've been absolutely blessed in my life to be given opportunities that I never thought that I would have. You know, I was recruited by some schools leading into college, and I got this great opportunity at the University of Ottawa. And they were like, hey, you know, they had a weird defensive scheme called the muddle huddle, which is they didn't have any down linemen. Everyone just kind of walked around before the snap of the ball, and then at the snap of the ball, they hit a gap. And so you didn't
on the line, or are you back off?
Some people are on the line, some people are some people are on, some people are behind, and you're moving around, and it's the thing is, it's hell for an offensive line to figure out who to block.
Yeah.
And so we had like 28 turnovers in 8 games the year before I went there. And it was just like this totally different and unique system. And I was the exact body type they were looking for, right? Because I'm not, you know, big enough. You know, I was probably big enough to play, you know, true hand in the dirt defensive end. Definitely not big enough to play interior defensive line. But they were like, hey, you know what? In this system, you can play as an interior defensive lineman, and you don't have to be that big, and you'll get consistent pressures on the quarterback. So that's what I did, and it fit perfectly, you know, with my body type at the time. And it kind of just fell in my lap. I was not expecting that.
So how did the rugby fall into all this as well? So how's that season kind of play out?
Yeah. So what happened was I came in Canada, you're allowed to take, I don't think you're allowed to do it anymore, but in Canada at the time, you were allowed to take a 5th year in high school. And so I graduated after grade 12 and I came back for grade 13 just to upgrade some classes, and you're allowed to play football. And so I got to do all the fun stuff that super seniors do, right? Like I got to play running back. I got to return kicks, right? Like, it's just, anyway, so I got to do that. And the prior summer I had played summer football, because in Canada, summer football is a big thing. And I played on a really great team. We had a bunch of guys go to the CFL and NFL. And so I had a lot of football IQ into that. And then when I got to school, I was quite a bit better at football, but I mean, when you go off to school, like you can go out drinking every night if you want. And I think I passed 5 classes in 2 semesters. And you don't maintain your scholarship or academic eligibility if you do that. And so I was like, well, fuck. Okay. And so went home for the summer. I was like, well, I'm going to train. I'll train for something. And then I was like, oh, like I had a buddy that's on the rugby team. Like I'll just email the coach. And so I emailed the coach. And he's like, yeah, we'd love to have you come out. We don't have the same eligibility rules because we're not like a true varsity sport. And I walked on, and I'd played some 7s, which is kind of like rugby. It's just rugby with less people. It's all the same rules. It's just rugby with less people. Same size field. And I'd played some 7s before that, so I kind of had an idea of the game. And then I just walked on, and they're like, hey, because it's not a varsity sport, they didn't have the same strength and conditioning. They're like, you're way more physically developed than everyone else, so you're starting in the first game that we have. And by the grace of God, I played 2 years there. The end of the second season, they elected me team captain. And then I was training that winter, and I was planning to continue playing rugby. And the defensive coordinator always for the football team, used to squat in the rack next to me in the gym. And he's like, hey man, like you're really big and really strong right now. Like, do you want to come back? And I was like, I didn't ever think I'd be afforded that opportunity. So I was like, yeah, okay. And it was like 2 weeks before our winter camp started. So for the first time since 2013, I put pads back on and I went back to play football.
What was your area of study before being ineligible and then after being ineligible?
So the interesting thing is my undergraduate is in religious studies.
So you really were just taking classes to take classes to play football and rugby.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
I was not a particularly academically minded individual.
Yeah. How did you decide? How did you decide on that?
Initially declared for history.
Yeah.
And this is how I wasn't academically minded. I initially was going to do a Bachelor of Arts in kinesiology, but then the only school in the province that offered it wasn't a school that I got recruited by. I was like, I'm not fucking walking on. And then I was like, this is stupid. I'm not going to be 7 hours away from home and walk on. So I initially just declared history because it had the lowest admission average because I'm not academically minded.
Yeah.
And just as an elective, I'd taken like a Eastern traditions course. And I was like, oh, this is cool. And then I changed my major, and then I started taking like early Christian antiquity courses. And then I was just all in from there. I was like, okay, this is actually pretty interesting.
What I ended up, because I failed out long story, but I couldn't get into college. So I had to go to like a fake college. I don't want to say it was a fake college, but it was a smaller college, and I had to take high school courses to be able to get into a bigger university. When I got into that bigger university, I took whatever entry-level classes. It was like a programming class, statistics, some fucking science class. I forget what they were now, but I flunked out. So I go, same thing, like I go home, and then when I go back, I didn't give a fuck. I don't even know why I went in the first place, except it was just expected. And so after I come back, there's no way I'm going to take the courses I failed. Flunk out twice, you're done for good, right? So I just walked the bookstore and just looked at the books, and like, that looks interesting. And I did this literally for years. Yeah. And was a semester shy from a sociology degree. And then I realized like, I probably, like, what am I going to do with that? Be a census taker? Like, so at that point I transferred out and made it exercise science and nutrition. So it's kind of the same thing where you're just trying to get through.
Yeah.
The way I kind of viewed it is it didn't really matter what it was in as long as I had it.
Yeah.
You know, but then later I realized, well, since I'm here, it should be something that I am interested in.
Yeah.
So is that where the schooling stopped, or did you?
Yeah. So for me, like, I think because I had an issue. So in 2015, like I went back to football, and they actually converted me at the end of winter camp, they converted me to fullback, and I hadn't played fullback since high school. And I was like, dude, this is awesome, because in Canadian football, like every one of the receivers and everyone can motion before the snap.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, this is awesome. Like I just get to tee off on people. You tee off on people enough, eventually you hit your head really hard. So I got my first concussion, and then I played summer rugby that summer. And then I came back in the fall, and I think I got 4 concussions between September 1st and like October 17th. And then I was like, okay, well, and I had to take like a year off of school. I had to like do all these vision exercises. Like I couldn't read for a long time. So I didn't actually graduate until, I think I started in September of 2012. I don't think I actually walked across the stage, because there wasn't like a fall convocation. I don't think I actually walked across the stage until like June of 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And that was for a 4-year degree.
Yeah. No, it took me 7 or 8 years to be able to get a 4-year.
Yeah.
But a lot of that was, for me, powerlifting was the first priority.
Yeah.
So I'd only take 1 or 2 classes at a time total, but I go year round.
Yeah.
That way it was more manageable and it didn't fuck up my training. And when did this industry come on your radar as far as a profession? So you graduate and you're thinking like, what are you going to do? Right?
Yeah.
What did you think you were going to do?
Yeah. Well, honestly, like I kind of always had the idea of like, because the funny thing about rugby teams that don't have a dedicated strength and conditioning coach is the guy that's more jacked than everyone else typically does strength and conditioning for the team. And that was the position I ended up in 2013 when I started on the rugby team. And so I had been used to like writing programs and then helping guys through workouts starting in like 2013. And then, you know, there was guys in the football team who like saw that I trained differently, and they're like, oh, you know, like you test pretty well. Like, what do you do? And I'd take them to the gym with me and we do different workouts. But I was like, well, I guess I'll be a personal trainer. And the first job I applied for was a personal training job at Good Life Fitness in Canada. Mm-hmm. And it was the first job I applied for, and then I just got it. So I was like, I guess this is what I'm doing now.
Oh, there's so many things to talk about right now. The one thing I want to point out before we go on is you're coming into the strength industry, powerlifting, you know, was the chute that you kind of went down with this sport training background.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm going to say rare. I don't have actual statistics, but if I'm to make shit up, like 10%, you know, maybe more now, but back then, maybe 10% came in with that type of strength and conditioning background. Mm-hmm. Normally, they're just coming in through gym bros, right? So it's different. We can get into it's a lot different. We can get into the nuances of that. But there's that aspect. So you have more of a holistic approach, I would say. Mm-hmm. More holistic than not.
Yes.
Right? And then you go to Gen Pop, which is actually better, that you have this more holistic approach instead of just this gym bro approach, but it's still not complete. Yeah. Because they're as you found out and can elaborate on, they're nowhere near as conditioned as you think. Like I started training people in, I don't want to say hardcore gyms to medium core gyms, like bodybuilding type gyms, while I was in college. You know, so you're dealing with a different type of physical attribute. They're already in shape, right? So it's kind of like peaking. When I landed my first job as a personal trainer, I had the first client, which was a male, 30 some years old, 220-ish, I would say. And I throw a plate on each side for the bench, right? And I go to lift out and I realize real quick, this is not going to happen.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to let the guy get stapled, and put it back. And I remember going home and telling my wife, like, I don't know what the fuck I got into. I'm not sure I know how to train these people.
Yeah.
Now I know broomstick bar, you just lower the load, which I did, but it also made me start going to all these different seminars that personal trainers were doing because I don't know what the hell to do. Mm-hmm. Did you find yourself in that same kind of predicament?
So the best part is my personal training manager, who I still talk to, Anthony Johnson. If you're watching this, shout out Anthony Johnson.
Oh, hold on. I should make a note. I was certified in the ACSM and NSCN, right? So you would think that they would, elaborate on how to train somebody that's deconditioned for 15 years, but continue.
And so the best part is we do the initial interview. He just asked me some questions. And then he asked me to come back for a second interview. And the second interview is I'm taking a client who's him through teaching them how to squat. And he does everything that the general population client who's never squatted before does. Right? I'm like, oh, so you just kind of sit your butt to your heels, and he's like, going all wibble wobbly. And he's trying to show me, he's like, what do you do if they can't squat? What do you do if they're unable to support their own body weight onto a box? How do you progress that? How do you start? Right? And it totally broke my brain because up to that point, I was like, how do you not? Everyone can squat.
Yeah.
But it in actuality
hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. But in actuality, that is a big part of the reason why I have the skill set that I have now, because I had to figure out it's not just like, okay, well, we just go lighter on the squat. It's like, how do you regress beyond you can't do a squat? Mm-hmm. Like, it's like, okay, like I had I'll never forget this. Her name was Vanessa. She came in and she had a horrible history of eating disorders, so bad that she had osteoporosis. And she couldn't bodyweight squat. And I was like, okay, well, I guess we'll do leg extensions and leg curls until you can. And, human body's pretty resilient. By the 4-month mark, she started with 5 pounds. Like, there's a little tiny plate on top of where the leg extension weight starts. I was only able to use that one. So you can do 5 pounds on leg extensions and leg curls for like a hard set of 8. And I think by the end of, it was either 3 or 4 months, I think she squatted 135 for 3 sets of 3. But the thing is like, I had to strip it back to like, okay, well, if we can't do multi-joint, I guess we do uni-joint, and we just start really light. Yeah. But without that foundational understanding, like, that's what's necessary for kind of any rehab or coming back from anything.
Yeah. Well, you end up being regressed to that from the start. How long did you do that for commercially?
So I started in September of 2017, and I left November of 2020.
Okay. Out of all the skills that you acquired during that time, what was the biggest one that you still use today? It's kind of a loaded question because I didn't know what this should be.
I think it's probably 2. The first, which we just talked about, is like being able to regress everything. And the second one is just being a people person.
Yeah.
Like knowing how to talk to people, because it became very apparent to me that ultimately at the end of the day, it did not matter how good you were if people couldn't resonate with you and you couldn't talk to them.
Well, they would stop showing up too.
Exactly. They're like, this is a nightmare. And, it's kind of a hardo coming in from college, right? Like I was just kind of a hard ass and like, I'd be like, no, it's fucking my way or the highway. But, that doesn't lead to renewals.
Yeah. How did this career path correspond with your powerlifting?
Oh yeah. So I ended up having, that brain injury. I have to take a bunch of time off of school. And, I was like, well, listen, like I've built all this strength, right? Like I was the strongest kid on the team. So I'm good at being strong. So I'll just continue trying to be strong. And so I hired a coach and I signed up for a meet with my buddy, and it was like June of 2016. So all that stuff happened in the fall of 2015 with football. And then June of 2016, I do this meet. I meet my coach that I had for 6 years at the time, Paul O'Need, at that meet. I meet Ken Wetham, like, all the Ontario OG powerlifters. And so that was that first meet. It was June of 2016. And then I did that. And then I did a meet, I think 2 months before I started, like a year later, like 2 months before I started at Good Life. It was like July of 2017. And then I competed on and off, while I was working until I left.
All right. Did you have training partners that you were training with for the powerlifting, or were you doing that on your own at the same club you trained at?
So I bullied the guys that I worked with into also powerlifting so that I had training partners.
Okay.
And then I would also go and train at another gym twice a week with actual powerlifters.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is my time at Westside corresponded with my time training the Gen Pop. Very interesting, right? So you spend your early morning training Gen Pop, leave, you go into Westside for 2-3 hours, then you go back to the Gen Pop. It was like,
so
and not even, it's like different planets, that you're going on. Did you have that same difference between that? Right? I assume you did, but it's different when you're training in the same place.
Yeah. It was, I think for me, the thing that I struggled with was, you get into meet prep, things change hormonally, you get a little fired up.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I would have clients like be kind of woe is me, I would get annoyed, right? You're like, dude.
Are you feeling like you're not the man you're supposed to be? Low confidence, negative thoughts polluting your brain. That's me. I get it. I've been dealing with messed up hormones most of my life. A couple years I hooked up with Merrick Health, and it was one of the best things that I ever did. They're a health optimization platform that does advanced lab works and goes deeper than probably what you've ever seen before. What you'll get with Merrick Health is they have guided optimization and the self-service diagnosis. I personally have been using the guided optimization for the whole time I've been with him. Dry is my health coach. He does an amazing job. The second route that they have is the self-service diagnostics. This is just a DIY with your own health journey. You just head over to Merrick Health, pick the panel, and they'll send you the report. You just kind of go from there. Either way, I highly recommend them, and you can get 10% off right now. Just head over to merrickhealth.com and use the code TABLETALK at checkout.
Like, your knee hurts, we'll do hamstring curls. Your knee doesn't hurt, we're squatting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't want to hear it. And that took me a long time to like get a handle on, like, dude, like you gotta treat this person gently enough that they want to return. But also, like, even the gym that I went to in Ottawa, like, there were some good lifters there, but it wasn't, I think for you, probably the reason why it was such a dichotomy was because of the environment of Westside.
Oh yeah.
The gym that I went to didn't have that environment.
Yeah.
Right. Like when I was at Dynamo with like Jay Nera and Paul and stuff, that had that environment. Like, that was nuts, but I was going there very infrequently.
Now when you're the trainer, you're the jacked powerlifter trainer,
yeah.
Right? So that has some marketing advantages, right? I was as well. So big 300-pound guy, bald, goatee, says shit I shouldn't say sometimes, kind of like what you would note. And so that's going to turn a certain group away, but it also brought other people in. Yeah. Because I realized I'm essentially a servant, right? So I'm a servant to these people that want to brag to say, hey, look, this is my trainer, so it's a weird identity crisis that you're going through because you're trying to be professional about this whole thing. But yet, am I like your chef? Like what the fuck, Yeah. And you probably did too. We probably leaned into it a little more than what we should have, right? Because we could have had even more clients, but I had more clients than everybody else. So it's, I don't know how much better that would have been, but I would have had better longevity with the 50% that would turn fast. Yeah. Or better compliance would be a better word, of the 30% of clients that showed up once a week, which drove me nuts because they're not serious. You know what I'm saying? But then the other part of me is the whole time I'm thinking they're going to make no progress. It's just a waste of fucking time. They show up. But at some point they're going to want to show up twice. I think if I wasn't that dick, they might have showed up twice.
100%.
So that's kind of where I think we're saying is it can play to the advantage because you're going to stand out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And which is odd because I was told in high school, because I was bigger than everybody else because of the powerlifting as well, by a very reputable business person, that your stature is going to demand attention, but what comes out of your mouth is going to, reinforce that stereotype. Basically, he was saying the stereotype you're going to have when you walk in a room is not what you think it is, right? It is with your peers, but it's not with everybody else. Stupid fucking weightlifter, right? That's what it is. But you have their attention. Now that you have that, what you say is either going to confirm their bias or it's going to violate their bias. And if you violate a bias, that's got more lasting power than if you confirm it, than somebody else. So I knew all that, but I was too young to apply it. It's how life works, right?
Yeah. Well, and it was interesting. So when I was working at the gym, we did tons of sales training. My manager to this day is the most talented salesperson I've ever seen in my entire life. Nobody else comes close. And, he'd had all of these statistics, right, laid out on his desk of like all these different demographics. And he had a conversation with me because I had missed a couple of renewals. And he was like, you do realize that 75% of personal training clients across the company are women. You can't act the way that you do and have renewals from women. There's a degree of humility and there's a degree of gentleness that's necessary with women that's not necessary with men. And if you want to build a lasting business, that has to change. And I was like, oh no. He's like, I'm not telling you to not be you. You just have to be you with a filter. He's like, because you are a nice person, but sometimes you just say dumb shit.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that's fair.
Did they do the lead generation for you, or was that you?
They did that. So it was both, right? So, I was very blessed to be at, we were like the last year that I was there, we won #2 club in the country across like 400 locations. We had like a member base of like 5,000 people. So it was just tons and tons. We're selling hundreds of memberships a month. And on those memberships, they're buying, these things called PTS or personal training starter packs, 4 or 7 sessions, which means that, we're getting these pre-selected, pre-sold people.
But you have to convert those.
Exactly. And then we would also have our assistant fitness manager and our fitness manager, assistant fitness manager. Literally their only job was to sell for the trainers. So they just give you clients. And then our manager, our PTM, fitness manager would sell people to, like, if things were dire, right? Like if we're $40K below budget and it's 2 days before the end of the month, he's all right, I'm going to go out and beat the concrete and get some people signed up. But there was all of these avenues, right? Because you could go up and talk to members on the floor. Yeah. You could get, like you would stand at the front desk, and if someone came in and got a membership and didn't get a personal training starter pack, you'd book them in for a one-off session. If they did get the personal training starter pack, they'd put them with you. You could sell them a personal training starter pack. Like there was 1,000,000,001 ways to get leads. So it was super easy.
Well, that's an advantage you have working in a club like that.
100%.
Which a lot of trainers today, they'll bitch because the club will take too much of a percentage, or, however the split is. And I get it because I was part of that whole model, but they forget that if they need to build their client base, there's, during a busy time, 10 or 15 people walking on the treadmill right now, another 10 people just walking around doing their own stuff that you should be building a relationship with, that are potential leads that are right there.
Yeah.
When it's your own place, your own gym or whatever it is, those leads are down the street, they're not right there in front of you. That's an asset that the club is providing that has value, major value. And a lot don't realize it until they go start their own gym or they try to do their own thing, which you found later, right? Yeah. Is holy shit. It was you lose 2 clients in a month. It's like, whatever, there's another 5 right there. I can just kind of pull it up from there. And it's a constant flow, especially in gyms like that, because the retention sucks.
Yeah.
There's always a new flow coming through there. But so as you're doing the powerlifting and the training, where would you put at that phase percentage wise your time allocation, your mental allocation to powerlifting versus training?
Okay. So I have always, my mom likes to say that I try to maximize, I always try to have the minimal input for the maximum output. And, so my buddy ended up as the assistant fitness manager. And I found out that if I just got him dinner, he would just give me clients. Because I was like, I don't want to service PTS because then I have to be here extra hours in the day. And I don't want to have to talk to people. So if I just give him dinner, then I get clients. And that means that I don't have to be here as much, which means that I can go home and have a nap, or that means that I can go to the gym, the other gym earlier.
That's awesome.
Right? I was like, I have no interest in, I've been here for 3 years. I have no interest in having a conversation with 10 people to get one sale when I can just give him $30 for dinner and I get to hang out with my friend and then he gives me clients. I was like, so for me, it was the time allocation was still higher at work because I still had clients to service. Yeah. But the mental allocation was 0% at work.
Yeah. So that was just a means to be able to help support the powerlifting.
100%.
Okay. At what point did that start to balance? Not balance as in what we would consider balance today, but 50-50.
It was, so I competed in, June or July of 2017, hit a huge total PR. And then I did that whole off season and I started work in September and stuff. I was initially going to compete in December and I was like, you know what, it's too, starting with personal training, you're there 60, 70 hours a week is a nightmare. I was like, I can't do a meet prep on this. So I got to get my schedule sorted out. Then I did a meet the following June and I destroyed my back in that meet. And that was the first time where I was like, you know what, maybe these injuries are, like I'd been injured a lot in football and rugby. I was like, maybe these injuries are starting to catch up to me because my back was bad. And then I rehabbed that. I did the meet with my back fucked up anyways. I was like, oh, I'll just take more D-ball because if I have bloat, maybe that'll help. Yeah. In retrospect, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah. You D-ball back.
I was like, pump means strong. Yeah. And so I did that whole off season following that back injury. And then I tore my right quad. And then I tore my left quad. And then after I tore my left quad, which was like 3 months after I tore my right one or 4 months after I tore my right one, I was like, dude, maybe there's a timeline on this that's not my timeline. And like, I might have to think about what the rest of my life looks like outside of powerlifting.
Let's back up. What got you into powerlifting?
Literally just because I was the strongest kid on the team. And I was like, well, there's a sport where you're just strong. I'll just go do that.
Yeah, but there's more to it than that, right? Because when you're not exposed to it, right, it is, I don't want to say it's shielded, but it was more open for you than it was for me, but it's not really well known. It's not like, hey, I want to powerlift. Yeah. But you go online and search. Were there meets around and stuff like that? I mean, how did you go about this? Just go online and search?
Well, because for me, like I was always kind of obsessed with strength even when I was younger. So like when I started doing Westside Barbell for Skinny Bastards, I had transitioned after that into 5-through-1. And then I started reading about, I read about Westside because of Westside Barbell for Skinny Bastards. And then I started reading about Jim Wendler. And then I started, reading elitefts articles and doing all that kind of stuff. And so I knew that powerlifting had existed. And I had seen Eric Lillibridge squat and I was like, oh, this is like really cool. So it was always kind of like back of my mind. I was like, I don't know that that's something I'll ever do, but I think that's pretty cool. And then when I was physically unable to perform the sports that I liked, I was like, well, I mean, I've kind of technically been training for this for a long time, so may as well see where I'm at. And then, my buddy Mike was getting into it, and he had hired a coach for.
Oh, there we go. So there's the anchor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so he was like, he came down to visit me. He's like, man, I'm going to do a meet. I was like, okay. He's like, do you want to do this meet with me? I was like, yeah, sure. And so I go down and like, dude, I didn't use any specialty equipment, right? I told you, it was an RPS meet. We have a 65-pound squat bar. I'd squatted on a 45-pound power bar the entirety of prep, right? I didn't pull on a deadlift bar. Granted, an Oki's not that different from a stiff bar, but, and so I was just like completely out of it, but I was like, this is still fun, right? Like I met a bunch of friends. I enjoyed it. It gave me that competitive outlet that I had been missing. And I was like, this is something that I can like go nuts over. Because that was my big thing, is I'm not a half measures kind of person. I am now because I'm older, but at the time I was not a half measures kind of person. I was like, I need something to just get it out. And that was the thing.
So that leads into that first meet. Then was it the second meet where you had the back issues?
It was the third one.
The third.
So second one was like, and you've competed enough that you've absolutely had meets like this where it's like you're riding the lightning. You're like, dude, everything's going right.
The second one was like that?
The second one was like that. And the thing too is between the first one and the second one, I went from drug tested to untested, and I added 332 pounds to my total.
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, if I went from 1525 to 1857, even if I go half of that, that'll be 2K in my third meet. And I went 9 for 9 at that meet, right? All of my thirds were maybe RP 9. And I was like, I'm going to be the best ever. I'm going to be so sick. And then, little stuff started to crop up. And then my back blew up like a month out of that meet, the subsequent meet. And I was like,
So that happens, both the quads tear, all this other kind of stuff. Then what pulled you back in a couple years ago?
Yeah. Well, you know what it was is, so I had done that meet in 2018. I didn't compete between June of 2018 and November of 2021. Between the pandemic and all those injuries and stuff, and a lot of big life changes, I just didn't do it. And then there was a local meet. All of my buddies were doing it. And I was like very light at the time because I wasn't pushing food. I wasn't being super intense. I just met my wife. So I was really into this, beautiful relationship that I was developing. And I was like, I'll just go out and see what I can do. And I think I competed at 231 pounds. And I think I squatted 694. And I benched like 408 and I pulled like 678 or something, which wasn't great, but it's like, dude, I'm 26 pounds less than I was last time. And I was like, all right, whatever. Like, I'm back into this. And then the next year we made the determination to move to America. And then once we were here, food's so cheap that I was like, I'm just going to get big again and powerlift again. And that's what got me back into it.
And then what happened there?
So move here December 26th, 2022, and then started training in 2023. Was initially going to do a meet in the April, realized that timeline was stupid. I typically make bad decisions when it comes to picking timelines. So my wife was like, hey, this is a dumb timeline. So I ended up pushing it off until December of 2023. 3 weeks out of that meet, I explode my fucking hamstring on my last heavy deadlift, like black and blue down the back of my leg. And I was like, much like with the back injury, I was like, initially I was like, kind of woe is me. And then the next day I was like, no, I'm going to fucking do this. I'm going to do this fucking meet. And so I competed 3 weeks later. The back of my leg is still a mess. And then I set a 5-pound total PR 5 years after I had set my previous one. And I was like, okay, I went 9 for 9. All of my thirds were like RP 9, maybe. Like, this is something to build off of. I can do this. Like, I can figure this out. And then I had a really productive off season again. And then I went into this prep, which is the one that I ended up actually exploding in. And like, my training total was nearly 1,900 pounds. And I was like, okay, I got this. Like, based on my thirds, like I'm looking at probably like a 1940, 1950 in sleeves. I hit that, which should all be within reason. I'll do one more meet. That's the 2K and I'm out of here. And then obviously best laid plans of mice and men, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So both quads.
Yeah. So it was, it ended up being, both patellar tendons, both medial and lateral retinaculum. I ended up, avulsing my tibial tuberosity on my right leg. I ended up tearing my adductor magnus off of the adductor tubercle down at the knee. I tore my rec fem. I tore a bunch of other hip flexors. And then
this on your third?
It was on my third. Yeah. And then cause I hit the hole I felt the right one start to go, and I've partially torn up my patellar tendon before. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to stand up. It's going to be a little fucked up. I might have to token deadlifts, but I'll still be able to bench.
On the third?
On the third.
So there was nothing on the first or the second that you were aware of?
Awesome.
Okay.
Felt so good. And then on the third, I got about 3/4 of the way up and I start to wobble. And I was like, this feels really weird. And then I felt it just And then obviously there's no extensor mechanism left. So my hamstring contracts. Right leg comes completely off the ground because my hamstring's firing hard. Shit rolls downhill, fall on the left side, and then I explode the left patellar tendon. And that one was transected, so it was right in the middle. So they had to overlap it to reattach it. It didn't come off the actual patella.
So the catalyst was the right knee first.
Yeah.
And then everything else is just casualties.
Yes.
You know, or it's innocent bystanders just getting whacked, you know, where if I'm not, and this is nothing against the spotters, but if they knew that the knee snapped when it did and they took it, all the other stuff wouldn't have happened, but they don't know because they don't feel what you feel.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And the thing was, it was between when the right one went and I fell was a quarter of a second.
Yeah.
So, you know, and the thing was when I initially, you know, I had people say to me afterwards, they're like, oh man, like, you know, those spotters should have done X or Y or Z differently. And I was like, dude, like, unless you've been put in that position, and I've never been put in that position, I was like, I don't know how I'd fucking.
No, the reason I pointed out though is, and you probably see this because we'll discuss injuries here a little bit deeper, is a lot of times people will have that first thing, the first synapse or whatever, the first injury. But then there's all these spiraling things that happen, which is like casualties of war, right? They weren't the precursor or the cause. They were just everything trying to keep you from becoming completely debilitated. Right. So it's all downstream. But many times people will look at one or two of those downstream things and think that was the causation. The causation, was that little thing that you felt weird. You know, just minute moments before everything else went haywire. And then they never address that. You get what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And then it will reoccur. Do you think that, how does the previous quad tears play into this?
Yeah, so that's actually a very good point. And so what had happened was with both of those previous quad tears, which were just muscle belly tears, right? They didn't require surgical intervention. Both of them spoke to the exact same thing, which is I tore my lateral quad, my TFL, left side, right side. And when I squatted, I always, because I came from, you know, like whenever I squatted, I would always squat like Olympic style, like high bar, ass to grass, dump into the bottom. And there's a lot more forward knee travel in that. And when you end up in this super upright, because I also have short legs, when you end up in this super upright extension-based posture and you're trying to squat super vertical, you just dump into your knees all the time. And so I think I got really fired up and then I would dump into my knees. And then because you're in extension, your femurs are kind of rolled out. Because those femurs are rolled out, that lateral quad is getting beat up and then eventually it tears. And so for me, that should have been the check engine light, you know, 5 years prior of like, hey, we need to retool your squat pattern. There's something here, like these tissues shouldn't be stressed this much. Like this is a leading indicator that something will eventually happen because you shouldn't be tearing your quad on things like this.
Staying hydrated is huge for training and performance. And this is why today's episode is brought to you by Element. Element gives you exactly what your body needs: 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, 60 milligrams of magnesium, 0 sugar, and no junk. Personally, I like to mix half a pack with my morning oatmeal. I'll use any of the chocolate flavors. I drink it with all my training sessions, watermelon being my favorite. Some other reasons why I use it is stable energy with no crash. It fights off fatigue and cramps, improves mental focus and clarity, helps regulate stress and supports deeper sleep, and there's no sugar and garbage. Here's the best part. You can try it totally risk-free. Right now, Element is offering a free 8-count sample pack of its most popular flavors. With each purchase, you get 2 of each of these 4 fan favorites, perfect for finding your own favorite or sharing with a friend. Don't like it? Give it to a salty friend and Element will give you your money back. Head over to www.drinklmnt.com/table talk.
Like this doesn't make any sense. It's because there's something wrong with the movement pattern. So had I fixed that at the time, who knows what would have happened? But to answer your question, like I think that was the writing on the wall, and I had that writing on the wall 5 years prior.
Yeah. Well, you learn from the injuries, or you
Yeah.
should, to be able to go back through. So with all that you've learned from tearing yourself apart, because you work with a lot of clients now,
Yes.
and are they all powerlifters now, or have you migrated somewhat away from that?
Yeah. So I would say probably 85 or 90% of my clients are powerlifters, company wide, probably 90%.
Okay.
I have some Gen Pop people who just, they resonated with what I was saying, and I just train them for Gen Pop, and they have no intention of ever competing, and maybe they'll bulk and cut and do kind of more basic Gen Pop stuff, but they're still squatting, bench pressing, and deadlifting. But I train mostly powerlifters, and company wide, it's mostly powerlifters.
Okay. With the powerlifters, a point that I want to make, because I revisit this every year, maybe more than once a year, is how many there actually are, right? Because you can go to open powerlifting and stuff like that, but that still becomes a little complicated. So now with AI, I can pit AIs against each other to be able to come up with this. Is so the best guess I have currently is there's right around 100,000 competitive powerlifter. That's a key word here, is competitive powerlifters. And if you go back a decade prior, maybe 50,000, so double in growth, 5 to 8% each year. It's been a little bit less growth over the past few years than years prior to that, but that's about what it is. But there's this other cohort now, which would be non-competitive powerlifters.
Yes.
Where when I was coming up, we would call people that train like bodybuilders, like closet bodybuilders. Like they're never going to be, they're not really, bodybuilders. That number is probably 1 to 2 million.
100%.
So that's a huge number of people. And so when you say the powerlifters, are you speaking the competitive, or are you also speaking that other cohort of people that train like what will probably never compete?
Like that.
Okay.
Right? So I would say of actual competitive powerlifters is probably 65%.
All right, cool. Because that's a topic I really want to get into.
Yeah.
So we'll circle back to that. But with the injury part of this, because you're going to run into, clients that have injuries, because if they are the competitive, right, there's going to be a distinction here between the competitive and non as we keep going on. But if they're the competitive, the injuries are going to happen.
Yeah.
Now, yes, I understand, and I'll say it for you, some of this can be out of scope, right? So with that being said, you still have to help navigate the scope that you're in, with a lot of competitive / idiots sometimes. So there's a distinction, right? And I get it, because I was that. I kind of still am, but that's a different model, right? Because they get hurt, let's say your first quads and stuff like that. It's the question when I was sponsoring a lot of these guys, the question I always got asked first after any injury was, how long is this one going to take? Right? Because they want that to be the least, possible. When they never asked that, I knew they were done.
Yes.
Right? And that's the game, for that cohort. How do we reduce this to the minimal time period, which it's kind of stupid, but I did it. And I did it even after George Halbert, who I used to train with, was great. One of the best bench pressers of all time. I'd always have recurring pec strains, and I'd always come back faster. And one time he said, if you just let this heal for another 3 weeks, maybe you'll strain it, once every couple of years instead of 3 times a year. Do you ever think about and it made sense, but I still didn't fucking do it.
Yeah.
And I just found ways to kind of hack the recovery.
Yeah.
To be able to trim, because his point was, look, it's already taken 4 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it's already taken 3 weeks. What's another 2? What's the difference between 3 and 5? The meat's 20 weeks out. Why not make it 6 and make sure it's, more bulletproof, but you still got to be able to push it down to here. It makes total sense. But when you're in it, you know what I'm saying? It's not that. It's like, no, every fucking session matters. And I already missed 2.
Yeah.
So this is like another one. And so then you're like using knee wraps around shit, to be able to support all this other kind of stuff, which is insane, but I get it. Right. And I know how to help people do it, which is fucked up, but I try not. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. So I think
And now it's peptides.
Yeah.
So it's not knee rest.
And that's the thing, right? Is like, I think I always have the conversation with them of you just lay out the potential futures, right? So on one end, we have, like you said, this possibility where it takes maybe 2 or 3 weeks longer, but then it's done. Or takes 2 or 3 weeks less, and then you could actually re-aggravate it and potentially even make it worse. And then you might be out for 4 months, right? And it's one of those things where it's like, you're actually saving time here, taking longer. You're saving time because then it's not going to come back. And this, you see this a lot, especially in any kind of like,
okay, so you have that.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm the client, and you've already told me that, right? So I go in that next week, and I'm squatting, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. But man, the fucker feels good.
Yeah.
So my check-in is going to be, it felt good. So I went ahead and did. So then you get what I'm saying? This is real life.
Yes.
This is what happens, right? So then how do you reel that back?
I mean, honestly, it's just, I prescribe them low to subsequent week. I'm like, you know what? You let the monkey out of the cage, so to speak. You're not allowed to pick the weight next week. Or what we do is, because a lot of my clients train within a conjugate setting, I have something called like a pull the plug variation, which is something that is so difficult to do that it's impossible to go heavy on.
Such as, give me one.
5 second eccentric, 2 count pause front squat to a box.
Yeah.
It's like, listen, asshole, if you want to go heavy, which you're totally allowed to, it has to be within the constraints of that exercise.
Well, the strain's still there. Like everything's still there. So
Yeah.
you're still feeding the beast, but you're doing it with a lighter load.
Exactly.
And that works.
Yeah, because it's a good one to do in injury management when they've cooked themselves a little too much, and you're like, you know what, we're gonna, because generally in injury management, this very well, you're gonna feel good before you are good. And so kind of having them know, it's like, hey, you had that session, we got away with it, but we're not doing that again. You're doing this the subsequent week, and then we may be even doing this the subsequent week, and then we're going to control the rate of progression after that. Because these huge deltas up in intensity or huge deltas up in volume are the thing that cause recurrent issues.
Yeah. Because it goes in phases. Like, what's the popular injury now? Say the last couple of years. Have you seen it kind of go in phases too?
Quads. I think it's quads. I think it's quad tendons. I get, like Paul and Eden, I wrote a quad tendon, patellar tendon rupture manual to how to recover from those. We've had far too many downloads.
Yeah.
No one should be downloading that. We've got a lot of downloads. Now, some of those people are just interested in those aspects of rehab, but
but not. Yeah.
But it's like I had a buddy. I mean, Jordan Gerald. He was at Power Surge. Whenever Power Surge was, he ruptured one of his quad tendons. And not in a million years would I have thought that happened to him. But I'll get people reaching out to me at least once every 2 months. Hey, I saw what happened to you. This happened to me. Can you help me?
How do you think this has become the more popular injury at this time?
Everyone squats in heels, and everyone squats into their knees now. So
when you say squat into your knees, what do you mean?
They're just not hinging enough, right? Yeah. Narrow stance, shoving everything forward.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, that works until it really doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I'm laughing is we just had one of our train your ass off things, and it's weak points also become this cyclical thing where it's different every few years.
Yeah.
Right. And I have a hypothesis on kind of how that was, where a few years ago it was the lats, not being able to engage the lats. Yeah. Right. And I think that kind of got solved to a degree because of remember all the stupid Instagram post of here's how you do a 1-arm lat row, right? But what was happening during that time period is that it brought everybody's focus to engaging the lats when they actually train the lats, right? Before that, it was the core, right? So we had all the, gallon jugs compressing, and here's my pop can, and so then that kind of fixed itself, right? And then right now we're back to the bracing again, right? Because that focus is no longer hyper focused across social media as it was before. And the lats are good. like a couple of years ago, like the lats were a fucking mess. It's like, no, you got elbows out, you got elbows in. You focus on what, and it was in there, but the hip hinge is a fucking disaster. When you're trying to teach people not only the bracing, but now you're going to put a hip hinge with that bracing.
Good luck.
Right? Yeah. Well, yeah. And they don't understand what a hip hinge is. They think it's an anterior pelvic tilt. It's like, no, that breaks your brace. It's this fucked up thing. But it seems to be that the bracing's broke because the hinging is not well understood. Right? So you guys need to start making a whole bunch of videos about hip hinging, then that will be fixed, then the lats will be fucked up or whatever it's going to be. I keep waiting for pecs to come back, but they haven't been, and so stay with that. So would you agree that it's both, right? Because you got to have both, right? But one's, like if you can brace effectively, it kind of takes care of the hinge.
Yes.
Kinda. But if you can hinge effectively, you should also kind of take care of the brace. Yeah. Right. So where do you put your focus if that's what it is now? That's what the weak points. That's why you're seeing these downloads, because the downstream impact of that is this. Actually, the real downstream impact is they're just falling forward on their squats, and the squats are not progressing. Yeah. That's where they see it. But
yeah. I mean, so I always think about, like, in this context of cueing, I always think about cueing things central to distal, right? So if we can cue something centrally, that will clean up something distally. So for instance, like, there's this concept in physical therapy for central stability for central stability for distal mobility, right? So if you're stiff in the middle, everything else will be stable enough to work well. And they can, your ankles will bend, your knees will bend, stuff like that. So if we can accomplish something centrally, brace wise, right? Because it all just kind of comes back to the brace, unfortunately. Everything else should organize around that, because the hinge should be very natural if we can maintain our brace. And if we can hinge naturally because the brace is maintained, then we're not going to dump into our quads, then we're not going to tear our quads. And then the other thing too is if we're hinging sufficiently while still having forward knee travel, then we have equal contribution from hips, hamstrings, quads, adductors, all that stuff, and then we have a really powerful squat. But when we start to deviate too far to one end of the spectrum, where it's too posterior chain or too anterior chain dominant, on the posterior chain dominant end, we end up with potentially labrum issues. Right? We end up with a lot of SIJ issues because you're so cranked into extension trying to stay upright so you don't fall forward. And then kind of funnily enough, the same thing on the other end, because you're trying so hard to stay upright, but you're just beating up your quads as opposed to your hips.
Now, when you say that the shoes are putting them in the hinge?
Sometimes, right? Because it's, for some people, and you've seen this as well, you put them in a heel and it just fixes everything immediately. But then some people, it almost reinforces the shitty behavior. And so it's getting them to understand, like what I always tell people is, you've seen Yuri Belkin squat. Like that's exactly how a raw squat should be, which is you start slightly hinged forward and then you just kind of swing your belt buckle towards your heels. You start slightly hinged forward, you swing your belt buckle towards your heels. That's going to give you a sufficient amount of hinge. It's going to allow you to maintain your brace, and it's going to give you equal contribution from your anterior and posterior chain. And if you can do that, and you can add load to that, pretty much everything works out.
So with the injury happens in soft tissue, what's the advice that you have for that? So we're not talking catastrophic. We're talking something that may or may not lead to something later.
So there's a couple things to take into account. When we look at the actual, what happens in soft tissue with an injury, we have a little bit of like inhibition, right? So the muscle's not going to contract as well because the body knows that it's damaged. We are going to have an increase in inflammation, so a little bit of local inflammation. And we're going to have obviously tissue damage, which is going to be taken care of by scar tissue. And then we have sensation of pain, right? And in actuality, what I would say is if you can eliminate the sensation of pain, the inflammation's taken care enough well by just getting blood into the muscle, and then you're shuttling out waste products. And then if you get blood into the muscle in a similar enough pattern early enough, then the scar tissue is going to lay down in line with the rest of the muscle fibers, so it's not going to re-tear. And then that blood flow stuff is also going to get the muscle to turn back on or come back online more quickly. And what I see in acute injuries like that actually holds people back more than anything is the pain side of it. But the interesting thing about the pain side of it is only a third of pain experience is actually the nociception or the pain that you're experiencing, right? So that's the sensory component, right? So you tear your pec, you feel your pec tear. You're like, holy fuck. But that's only 1/3 of the actual pain that you're experiencing. The other two components are cognitive and affective. So cognitive is kind of fear of what the pain could mean.
Yeah.
And affective is kind of how it affects you emotionally, right? It's like, is this going to stick around for a long time? Right? And so the interesting thing about pain experience is when you look at how they have people with chronic pain or what they teach people with chronic pain to do to manage their pain is they don't care and they don't worry about the nociception component. They talk to them about the emotions around it. And if you can get rid of those, the pain on its own will reduce. And then if you do all of the other stuff associated with rehab, that's also going to give us something called exercise-induced analgesia, which is a down regulation in nociception. So as long as you can take care of the emotions and get blood flow into the muscle, and you can do it in a similar enough pattern to the pattern that you heard it in, you're going to be pretty fine pretty quickly, as long as it's not just egregious.
Yeah. One of the things that I personally, right, you got to be compliant, right, scope, all this other shit, is when I'd have a soft tissue injury, and this actually came from Louie's advice, is the fear was the compensation patterns that are going to develop if you avoid the pain of where that was, right? So say it's a pec, right? And there are things you can do to train around the pec, boards, different grips, shit like that. But I always made a real conscious effort to always use, if it was a broomstick or the barbell, the same exact movement pattern that it tore in, which would hurt, right? And the gauge for me was it should hurt, but then after say 4 or 5 reps, it doesn't hurt as much.
Yes.
It gets a little, if it keeps hurting, then that I'm not ready for that yet. But if it starts to subside, and the thought process of all this was, if we train around it, then we're going to have all these compensation patterns that are going to be developed. And when you go back to what you're supposed to do, your body's not going to know what the fuck to do. And then boom, it's going to be overstressed.
Yes.
Because of that. Is any part of that thought process true?
Honestly, that's literally what I laid out, and what you just said.
Yeah.
Is the exact same thing.
Okay.
Right? Because you think about it, it feels better over the course of the set because you have exercise-induced analgesia, because you now have down regulation in your local nociceptors, and you're getting blood flow into the muscle, which is the other thing you're supposed to do, because you're shuttling out waste products, and you're doing it in the exact same pattern that you injured it in, which is going to have the scar tissue lay down in line like we want it to.
Okay. Now here's where the shit can go sideways.
Yeah.
Right. And pain meds, all this shit I've done, by the way, pain meds, I seen the shit out of it beforehand. So I went and feel that pain to be able to do it, to be able to use a higher load for that to actually happen. And it took me a long ass time to realize the load didn't matter. No, because it was the circulation that we're looking for, as you were noting, to be able to get the waste products and all that kind of shit, new blood in there to help it heal. Actually, too much load makes it harder for that to happen, because you can't get the number of repetitions in there to be able to get that, what you're looking for. But, the reason why I'm putting this out here is this still happens with the competitive side. One of the things that, because you're in this space deeper than what I am, is pec tears have kind of like gone away. Right. Yeah. It's when I first started competing, we're going way the fuck back now. It was like 2-3 pec tears every meet.
Oh my God.
It was like every meet you would go to, boom, popped a pec, boom, popped a pec. So most time they wouldn't get it fixed unless the tension ruptured. Biceps were kind of a big thing too. So it was either the pec or the bicep. You get through the meet, it's like, it's a good meet. I didn't tear something off. You're kind of in that realm now, where if you get through the meet and not tear something off, it's a good thing. I can't figure out what has changed to allow that to not be front and center as it used to be. Because it was so my first pec tear was in high school, so it goes way back. So I kind of knew I was fucked there, because once you have one, the chances of a strain, let's say a strain, right? Because there's a difference between a strain and to me, a tear is complete rupture, right? And so I was super precautious around knees and backs.
Yeah.
Because I'm aware, like, this guy can't compete anymore because his back's fucked up. This guy can't compete because his knee's fucked up. So what am I going to do to not fuck up my back and knees? And I didn't. I didn't think about, the pec, I just, whatever, it was what it was, shoulders downstream of that. I never thought about the hips, go through my whole fucking entire career, no lower body injuries, and need 2 fucking prosthetics for my hips. Like, the fuck. But anyhow, the pec thing has me super curious, and I'm sure there's not a definitive answer, but what do you think?
I honestly think that when you look at, and there's still guys that bench like this, don't get me wrong, but when you look at, this recurrent pattern that I see most commonly in pec tears is the head up and the dump onto the chest, right? It's like this position. Because then when you think about it, right, if we're here, we've lost our backside. We have no longer have any upper back. And then one of two things happens in this position. You either fight your elbows back down and fight yourself back into extension, then drive from there, or what people most commonly do, they get their elbows in a bit and then they press here, and then it's all pecs. And then the pec is being asked to do so much more because all these other positions or all their muscles are out of leverage, that it's like, well, of course it's going to fucking tear because you've never asked it to do that much before. And so I think the reason why it's happened less and less is because honestly, people have been working to meaningfully reduce the range of motion on bench press.
Yeah, I can see that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense because that's across all federations.
Yeah.
Right. So it's that I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think of things sometimes in isolation of certain styles of lifting.
Yes.
Right. So I'll think of it more isolation of geared, multi-ply, non-drug tested.
Yeah.
But that crosses the barrier into drug tested too.
Yeah.
They had to make a rule. Right.
They were winning too much.
Yeah. Because of that. Where I'm going to pivot towards is we're going to go back in your timeline a little bit. So was it 29? When did you start your online coaching?
Yeah. So it actually started in literally when I started training at the gym, I had guys that I worked with be like, hey, do you want to write me a program? Hey, do you want to write me a program? And I was like, okay, fine. So I would just write recurring programs for them. And then it was like, at first it was a couple of guys. And then it was, some trainers at other gyms. And then it was, I'd go to a local meet and I'd handle my guys. And then there'd be other people reach out who weren't even local, but just came to the same meet. Hey, can you coach me? So by probably February of 2019, so it was a slow burn between 2017 and 2019, but probably by February of 2019, I was up to maybe 20 or 25 clients. And then by February of 2020, I was probably at 35. So, between 2017 and 2020, I probably went from none to 35.
Okay. And now you have coaches working underneath you.
Yeah. So I got 3 guys. I got Kyle, Dan, and Nick. Nick's still back in Canada. Kyle's in Seattle, and Dan is currently deployed, but his home base is in Sacramento.
Okay. I'm going to circle back to the business aspects.
Sure.
Because I have some business questions with that, and want to stay kind of in the programming part of this. So would you say that the majority of your demographic are male 25 to 40?
It's actually shifted more recently. I'd say it's male and female 25 to 40.
Okay. But it's still within that range. And
yeah.
You already said that the majority are non-competitive, right? So they train like powerlifters. Maybe they'll compete someday, but not so much, right? Where I'm interested here and the way I can lay this out would be during my post-competitive powerlifting identity crisis. I was searching for shit to do.
Yeah.
So body recomps or whatever you want to call that, dieting down, bodybuilding type shit was one of the paths, that I was doing, worked with Justin Harris, Shelby Starnes, John Berardi, John Meadows, all these different people. It was not my style of training, to say the least, but I was interested and I learned a lot. But one thing I told all of them was, coming from the power and lifting sphere, I'm all in with everything that you want to do, all in with everything you want to do, but I'm not going to do the last 6 weeks.
Fair.
Right? Because that's with powerlifting, that's when shit can go sideways, right? We'll tell the competitors, look, before you hit that, where you start to deload, it's going to be the weeks you're going to feel like shit. It's just how this works, right? Yeah. And so I just kind of took that and said, okay, I competed in bodybuilding twice in my earlier years. Wasn't that good, but that last few weeks, shit's going to come in, directs are going to, all this other stuff's going to come in, which is it's not worth the squeeze, with what that is. Now, when you're working with powerlifters, is that kind of worked into this if they're non-competitive?
Yeah. So what I typically tell them is a lot of them come in with the intention or belief that they're going to be non-competitive. Yeah. And then they'll start to see some decent progress. I'm like, we should probably do a meet. You can pick one. We'll do a meet. I'll come out for it. And you kind of slow roll them into it that way. And I think, because I always tell them too at the outset, I'm like, hey, we need to have objective goals. And this from personal training, right? It's like you tell clients, you need to have objective goals and things to work towards, because coming up and showing and getting fit is not a fucking goal, right? That's a nebulous thought. Yeah. Right? It needs to be actionable. It needs to be objective. And so I try to kind of slow roll them into that. And it's obviously a multi-year process. But I'm always with all of them 100%. Like, I'm eventually pushing them to do a meet.
So how do you keep them from getting sucked into the void, sucked into the, and this is probably a biased question because I've lived in this world my whole entire life. Get sucked into that. This is my number one priority on what I want to do, everything else. And they may be predisposed that's never going to be the case. Yeah. Right. So that may answer the question itself, but is that part of this?
Well, so that's much more commonly an issue that I have to work through with people that are already competing. The beautiful thing about people that don't really have those aspirations is those typically aren't super competitive people to begin with, because otherwise they would have already done it. They know they know that they want and need help, but they're like, yeah, I'm just kind of having fun with this. Those aren't really the people that are like, I'm gonna fucking go. You know what I mean? Maybe after a couple of meets they end up there, but very rarely. Those are the more measured, gentle, kind, calm people. But that identity or stopping them from having that be their whole identity, that's much more common. I get people come to me who are younger, who are already competing in powerlifting, and I'm like, yo, buddy, you need to fucking slow your roll, because like this can be taken away at any moment and you still have to live the rest of your life.
Do you have those others? I'll lay an example out. Yeah. So you have somebody that has been training, is probably the typical influx of they've been training for several years. They just want to get more serious about it. So they want to train like a powerlifter. Dave Tate here from Elite FTS to talk to you about bands. We've been a supplier of bands for almost 2 decades now. So I've known my way around the band landscape. When I'm talking about bands, I'm talking about floss bands, long bands, short bands, bands you can use for resistance training, mobility training, body weight training, and flossing. One of our most popular bands, or actually our most popular bands, are the long bands. The long bands are typically used the most with squats, bench presses. Our floss bands are bands that you wrap around the joint to be able to help with mobility, circulation. And the short bands are designed for shorter range movements, bench press, deadlifts, and a lot of times people will use them with resistance machines to help accommodate the strength resistance curve. Head over to elitefts.com and look for bands in the toolbar or blowout menu. As they start going through this, they're progressing through, they get to the 5, they start getting to the 3s. Do they think they have to take steroids to progress?
No, because a lot of them, like, and the thing too is I actually, and we were having this conversation earlier, I really dissuade people from going in that direction. I really strongly dissuade people from going in that direction. And I lay out what the future looks like. I'm like, hey, you need to either take a pill or stick a needle in your butt forever. Like, there's no off switch here, because the age still exists. If you do this at 24 and you decide you don't want to do it again at 32, you've nuked your reproductive system. You got to do something. And they're like, well, I don't want to do that. I'm like, yeah, exactly. So you're not going to do this, because there's also, and I lay out all of the secondary negative psychiatric and neurological consequences of PEDs. And I lay out, the consequences in terms of cardiac health and all-cause mortality and all of those things. And they're like, well, this sounds pretty nuts. And I'm like, it can be really nuts. And that's the price that you pay for burning the candle at both ends, so to speak. Right? It's like, you're either going to burn out or you're going to fade away. The choice is yours.
All right. So they're not coming in with that being associated with the sport.
No, not at all, because probably 80% of my clients are drug tested.
Okay. All right. So when you lay this out, I believe it's conjugate based.
Yep.
Right. So that can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. And it's going to mean different things to different people at different levels that they're at.
Yeah.
Right. So with the demographic that we're talking about, which will be your clients, what does that look like after you've gone through the intake? And let's go. You've worked with them for two or three blocks.
Yeah.
Right. So they're up to speed.
Yeah. Yeah. So typically what we'll do is it's this kind of weird hodgepodge mishmash of kind of block and then also conjugate, then also with elements of DUP because it's higher specificity. So essentially what we do is, they do a meet or whatever, they have some kind of culmination of work that results in some kind of failure point. Then we say, okay, based on this a failure point, right, are we determining that this is a structural failure point or a muscular failure point? So a muscular failure point would be like, they got to here and their back was set and they literally couldn't do this on bench. And a structural failure point is this, right? So it's like, they couldn't keep thoracic extension, which, there's secondary muscular consequences, but it could also be that their T-spine's tight, blah, 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 blah. So we determine which one of those it is. And if it's the muscular one, we just put exercises in as secondaries to fix it. If it's a structural one, they just can't keep the posture. Then we give them variations based specifically on improving that posture. Right. So if you have someone who comes uncoiled in the bottom position of the bench, they're probably going to do more close grip because it's more shoulder extension, and they're probably going to do more long pause or tempo work because they're spending more time down there. And if it's someone who's struggling with keeping midfoot pressure to the bottom of the squat and they're dumping forward or dumping back, it's going to look more like, tempo and pause, but it's still going to be low bar. And the thing too is, I actually had this conversation with Anthony Oliveira, is, I think people think about conjugate in terms of like, well, you have to be cycling bars and you have to be cycling rep maxes. It's like, you could literally do low bar for 8 weeks. You could do a single on low bar for 8 weeks and it'd still be conjugate, because the first block could, or the first, session or day one, week one could be a 5-second eccentric and a 3-count pause. And then week 2 could be a 3-second eccentric, 2-count pause. And then week 3 could just be a 2-count pause. And then week 4 could just be a regular low bar single. And the preceding weeks have directly improved your ability to hold the correct posture on the movement. And then you see what it looks like in week 4. And if you have to put something else in the second month, you do. Or if it actually looked really good and we know that progression worked and they hit, either close to a max, or a PR, it's like, we're just going to do that again until it doesn't work anymore. But, like people get really, horse blinders on when it comes to this idea of conjugate. And it's like, okay, the big gripe that people have with conjugate is that it's not specific enough. It's like, okay, well, there is some validity to that. But it's like, how do we reconcile these two things? Which is, we still need to practice the sport. We still need to have that strain. We still need to have max effort, but we still need to have training progress linearly from lower intensity to higher intensity and from higher volume to lower volume. So what does that look like? It's like, okay, well, it might just be, instead of a top single on, with the tempo preceding blah, 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 low bar in the week 4, it might look like ascending sets of 5 with that same tempo constraint.
Yeah. Well, what they are doing is they're looking at all periodization is linear, blocked, and conjugate. Right?
Yeah.
That's done effectively. But they'll look at the typical model of just work up, max out, right? And then you're going to change, that stimulus based upon however you feel, right? Now you could still do that and base that stimulus you could base it on load, right? So yes, I could change the bar every single week, right? I could start with a front squat, which is going to be lower in load. And then the next week, like a safety bar squat, which will be a little bit higher in load. The next week, maybe a cambered bar squat, which some people would be better than safety, which is going to be a higher load. Then the next, like a spider bar squat, which is going to be higher in load. Still max single for all those, but the weight goes up. Like, so the load is what's progressing each time. And so that's one variation. Another variation is do what you laid out. The tempo is going to change. The bar is going to stay the same. It's still this linear variation that's going through there. The hacked model of just throw in what you want to throw in. I would debate and say that, yes, it's a hacked model. Yes, that will work. But you are still changing movements based upon, this is more advanced, how you feel. Like how we did is we just picked whatever the fuck we felt like doing. But a lot of that was based upon, you know what, I feel trashed right now from what happened the prior week. So we're going to pick this movement and we're all going to agree on whatever this movement is because we know the load is lower. Or we know we recover faster from this stimulus than this stimulus. Or we feel really good. We're going to do this one, right? Because this one beats the shit out of us. And so it is DUP, right? It's auto regulation that's through that. But if you haven't acquired that skill, then you have to have some kind of guidelines,
100%,
you know, to work from. And to me, it's not complicated, right? To you, it's not complicated, but to the person listening, they're like, oh, fuck, you know, you just work up and max out. I can't do that. I'm going to get hurt. Well, you could, if the tempo is controlled, or you do movements that are almost impossible to get hurt on. You know, there are those, and then you put those in there and kind of rotate them through. So you outlined perfectly, you know, one scenario to be able to do that, while you're going to have a conjugate camp that's going to say that's not conjugate. I'm like, you don't understand what the hell conjugate even is. Right? Because you're still doing the main thing, which is teaching people. And if you were to boil it all down into what that one day is, you're teaching people how to strain. Right. It's yes, it's load, but it's teaching people how to strain. So check. It doesn't have to be done with a straight bar, max effort weight, you know, that kind of stuff all the time to be able to put in there. So if that's kind of how the max, we'll call it max effort day, which is kind of like a bad name just to begin with.
Heavier effort day.
Yeah, it's a heavier effort day. And so then if you have the lighter effort day, which some would call that speed day, then what does that look like?
So it's typically based on a variation that they're bad at, right? So the way that like the typical month will lay, or the week will lay out rather, is they will do like max effort lower and then immediately dynamic effort lower for the opposite afterwards, right? So if they max effort squat, they'll dynamic effort deadlift. If they max effort deadlift, they'll dynamic effort squat. And then unless they're near 500-pound bencher, over 500-pound bencher, they'll be doing a rep effort bench and a max effort bench. And then in prep, that rep effort bench turns into almost like a technique bench and then a max effort bench. So that dynamic effort is always based on, and it's only for lower body, it's always based on something that's going to directly improve their performance on their next max effort day. So it's like, okay, if you have someone who on sumo, they struggle with getting behind, like they sit behind the bar at the knees and they can't walk out. It's like, all right, fucker, you're going to do, 6 to 8 doubles every minute on the minute, RP 5 to 6, or we'll cap it based off of a previous rep max or whatever. 6 doubles, RP 5 to 6 every minute on the minute, pause at the knee. Try sitting behind the bar, right? And then that gives them that stimulus and that exposure of like, this is what that foot pressure should feel like at my knee on sumo. And then when they roll into the next max effort variation that is sumo, it fixes it because they had that impulse of like, I know what my feet are supposed to feel like. And that's just kind of how I run it. And it's worked pretty well. And then essentially it's just like, it's all the variations, it's all the stuff, it's like, it's either going to be a tempo, or it's going to be a pause, or it's going to be some kind of extended range of motion. It's going to be some kind of specialty bar. And it's all just based around like, you can't hold this position. How do we get you to hold that position better?
And then when the weak points expose themselves through those movements, those become what the accessories will be.
Yeah, exactly. And then what I also do is I don't do rep effort on deads, but I also do rep effort on squats. So I'll do like, it might look like heavy single on squats, and then their down work would be the rep effort stuff. So it might be 5 ascending singles, and their down work might be 2x8 high bar for the rep effort on squats, and then their dynamic effort deads, and then a couple of lower accessories because they're pretty fucking smoked by then. And then when the next failure points kind of start to filter through, like I'll change the accessory to something that may be a little bit more posturally focused as opposed to just muscularly focused if I'm seeing a really specific failure point. But typically, like in every lower session, I'm doing quads, glutes, hamstrings, adductors, lats / upper back, abs, and obliques. And then for every upper body session, it's pecs, delts, biceps, triceps, lats, upper back, and then maybe rotator cuff in certain people. And then you would just be swapping out those specific, let's say, tricep exercise, right? So if they're not having a failure at lockout in their bench and they just don't have that finishing or like drive through strength at the end of their bench, and that's not a failure point that they have, they might just be doing tricep extensions. But if you know that that's their specific failure point, they'd probably do something like a rolling extension or a Tate press.
Yeah.
Right. So you just swap it out based on specific need, but you're always training kind of all of those muscles all the time. And then what I typically do in terms of phasing that in so they're not too cooked is I never want to go heavy on accessories. So like, let's say on bench, because we talked about that failure point at lockout, I would have them do the heavier upper accessories on the rep effort or technique bench day, because this is not as hard. So this can be harder. And then when this stuff is harder, this stuff's not as hard. So it kind of ends up evening out, and we're not cooking them too much and not putting too much hard stuff on one day, and then them starting to suffer and then have a reduction in output here, which is just not going to feed into this day properly.
So do you have any work that's in this model at all for movement planes outside of the power lifts?
So that's a big thing, because actually when you look at even like injury risk in sports, right? So the athletes, and there's actually a lot of like blue chip football schools that will not recruit kids who just played football because they're only in that one range, they're only in that sagittal plane, let's say, right? So there is going to be a lot of stuff, especially in people who are bigger and stiffer, right? So people built like you and me, we're called something called, it's called a wide ISA or infrasternal angle, which is this rib cage is super flared, right? Gravity's starting to pull us down, and we're winning the fight against gravity, and our skeleton is representative of that. So for us, we need more stuff outside of the sagittal plane because we're already super sagittal plane competent. And the consequence of being super sagittally plane competent is you get all these compensatory strategies that fucking hurt. And so you want to get more frontal, you want to get more transverse so you can kind of get your skeleton to move in these different directions. And then you're also going to unlock a lot of range of motion that you've lost through being super sagittally plane competent. Now, when you have someone who, for instance, is a narrow ISA. So I'm a super wide ISA, you're a super wide ISA, he's a super wide ISA. My wife, by contrast, is 5'1" and 120 pounds. She's not a wide ISA. So for her, a lot more of her stuff is just in the sagittal plane, and a lot more of her stuff is just kind of mid-range heavy stuff. Everything can be kind of heavy because we need to stiffen her skeleton. Mm-hmm. We need to get her to be able to accept that load. For you and I, we don't have that issue. And in actuality, we've gotten a little too good at that. And we now have these compensatory strategies, which is a reduction in range of motion, which is going to cause pain down the road if it's not taken care of by moving outside of that sagittal plane.
Where does that fit in this structure, right? Is it its own? Two questions here. Like, where does it fit within this structure? And if it is always ingrained in the structure, which could be one answer to this. And if it's not ingrained in the structure and it's just a block or two blocks, which some people will do. And if it is the one or two blocks, this is the second question, how long will the adaptations that have been occurred during those two blocks actually last once you move away from those?
Yeah. And so we always want to kind of have it as an underpinning, especially in people like you and me. And it's small modifications, right? It's not anything crazy. So for instance, instead of just doing a regular cable row, you might do a single arm cable row, and you might set this foot way on the outside of the plate, and you might let your rib cage rotate all the way across, right? So now there's a rotational component to it, right? And you're getting that rib cage to bend and move and get that scap to slide all the way forward, get this side to push back, which is stuff that our body needs in order to actually feel good. So it's for people like you and me, it's always going to be this underpinning. It's kind of within the program all the time.
Okay. That's That's a really good point that I want to kind of double down on, because the answer that a lot of people will have to things like this is just add on top. Right. So you already have the program.
Yeah.
You need to put in this rotational work.
Yeah.
So I just stick in the rotational work. You need to put in, loaded carries for whatever reason. They just stick in the loaded carries. So then they end up with adding 20% more shit to what they're already having a hard time recovering from, or should, because that's what training is. And now it's impossible for them to recover. But if you can take what those accessory movements are and modify those to check 2 boxes.
Yes.
Right. So that's what you're doing.
Yeah, okay. Well, exactly. And it's, I think DeFranco actually said this, and I'm sure somebody else said it, but I remember him saying it, is this idea of training economy, right? Which is, can you get multiple things done with one movement? And people don't think about things in terms of that. And then they just add, like, can you imagine how laborious a workout would be if you had to pick an exercise that trained just your quads, just your glutes, just your hamstrings, just your adductors, just your abs, just your obliques, just your lats, and just your upper back?
Yeah, it's called bodybuilding. It sucks.
It would suck so bad, right? But it's like, we kind of reasonably understand. It's like, okay, well, we might do a leg press, and then we might do, I don't know, like we might do a Bulgarian, we might do a leg press, we might do a hamstring curl, and then we might do the adductor machine, and then some abs.
Yeah, but if you have to take that and then put it into a strength program to build those 3 lifts, where you're not going to be able to recover. 2 things, you're not going to be able to recover if you do it right. And second, you're not going to be able to do it right. Because you're not going to be able to put the effort.
You're too cooked.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the big thing is, like, if I were to give people one really simple piece of programming advice to follow, right? So there's 3 types of exercises that you can have, right? You can have lengthened exercises, which bias a longer muscle length, right? Which are going to be great in terms of restoring range of motion, right? So someone like you and me, we need more lengthened exercises to restore that range of motion. You have mid-range exercises, which are the classic heavily loadable dumbbell press, RDL, stuff like that. And you have shortened exercises, which are good for neuromuscular control and kind of low neurological fatigue, but still get volume in. Right. So that might be something like a sternal press round, which is a shortened exercise. So because those, muscle fibers are closer together, the actual amount of substrate necessary to fully contract them and get them fully closed is not very much. So it's very low fatigue. So you can kind of backfill in, because lengthen is very fatiguing because it's at a very long muscle length. Mid-range is fatiguing because it's heavy. And then shortened is just not fatiguing because, 1, you can't load it that heavy because the muscle's shortened. 2, you can't, you're not using very much energy to have that happen. So, like smaller people, they do more mid-range stuff. They do more heavily loadable stuff. Bigger people, they probably need more lengthened stuff, and you need to backfill in with shortened stuff because the lengthened stuff is more fatiguing.
Right. So when you're working with the bigger people, so now we'll move into this other category. So it's bigger people, bigger rib cages, however you explain that, but also heavily muscled.
Yes.
Right? Because that changes things too.
Absolutely.
Because there's more oxygen and there's more energy going into every rep. How do you mitigate that?
Yeah, it's you always, and the thing too is, like, tested versus untested is an additional complicating factor. Let's take the untested 275 pound male. There's a person I'm specifically thinking of, which is Griffin Uhl, which is he's a total mutant, best dude ever. He is so muscular. Played college football, University of Louisville, total beast, pulled 400 kilos conventional, just a man's man. We have to give him more lengthened stuff to just to impart some kind of stimulus to change the shape of his skeleton. And then if we do too much of that, he gets fatigued. And then the actual volume that he can do on those, I mean, he's a workhorse, so he has enough GPP to recover from more volume. He always asks me to do more volume, and I'm like, dude, like, all this stuff we're doing is like pretty fatiguing, and we're also coming back from some other stuff right now. So like we can taper that up over time, because I know you're a dog and you can recover from it. But for most people, most of the time, the bigger people, like, if you're doing more lengthened work, like, you're going to have to do less sets. You're not going to be able to do 4 or 5 sets. You're going to do 2, maybe 3.
Yeah. Well, the bigger and stronger they get, the one variable that I'm amazed that people don't recognize is the workload's higher because they're working up to a heavier weight.
Yes.
Right. All reps matter.
Yes.
Right. So all that, when you start to add it all up, the workload before the top set is already higher, way higher than what somebody that's squatting 60%
Yes.
of what they are. That's a recovery demand that has to fall in there. And what you don't want to do is make these big jumps, which you would do at a meet, right?
Yeah.
Because it makes the top set easier, which is a strategy.
Yes.
Right. But you're also slowly reducing your work capacity.
Yes.
Which then renders its head in your ability to not recover, which I hypothesize that one of the reasons why, as you get stronger and stronger and stronger, one of the other things that you'll see almost in everybody is accessories drop, everything else drops, and it just becomes that main lift, right? And what I think happens with this is either through a slight muscle belly tear or vacation or time constraints, whatever it is, they're stuck in this short block for a few weeks where all I got time to do is go and do the main thing that I need to get the fuck out. And it's a legitimate reason, but they do that for a couple weeks. Then time restraints are gone. Then they go back to their regular training. And it's like, man, this feels like shit, like the week after that regular training. And like, I don't need to do all this other shit. I was way stronger when I didn't do it. And what they really just did is they peaked, but didn't know they peaked.
Yes.
Right. This is what you do before a meet. Then they get this mindset to where it becomes all I need to do is they found their minimally effective dose. They think, right. But it doesn't rear its head until a couple of weeks after. Actually, they can ride that for a while.
Yes.
For actually quite a while. Then boom. It tanks out, and you're like, well, let me see your program. Like, oh, fuck. That's,
is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot, right? I mean, if you do it, it's a lot, but it's like, this is why. Like, we got a problem here.
Yeah.
Like, we have nothing to swap out.
Yeah.
Like, the only thing we can swap out is the main thing.
Yeah.
You realize that.
Yeah.
And like, oh, shit. Like, yeah, you're fucked. Like, peak, and then we go into a different block.
Yeah.
That's why I say everything ends up being blocked at a certain point in time.
It's all blocked.
Right? Because it will come into something like that. And it's like, you know what? We got to pull this shit way back because we got to reintroduce this stuff, build this work capacity back up again, where the minimal effective dose, it's important to know, but you need to know what that really is, not the peaking dose.
Yeah.
You see the difference?
Absolutely.
Yeah. How do you explain that to the people?
Honestly, I tell people it's because the way that I phase it out to people is I explain to them, I'm like, there's no reason why we shouldn't reasonably be able to compete 2 to 3 times a year. There's no reason. There's absolutely no reason. And I think this idea of like competing adaptations between peaking and
unless they blast a ton of shit.
Yeah. And it's, people always make this argument of like competing adaptations. It's like, oh, well, you're not building muscle, and it's like, there was this idea of the interference effect, which is why block periodization came about, right? Because they were like, oh, interference effect, you can't train these disparate qualities at the same time. Well, Westside existed and proved that wasn't the case whatsoever, right? You can still build muscle. And in actuality, I would say in an untested male, you're probably going to build the most amount of muscle in meet prep because you're on the most amount of shit.
Well, the other thing in there is, in other sports, there's more motor abilities you're trying to develop.
And you still do it.
Right? So.
Yeah. And it's, and so I tell them, I'm like, GPP is the underpinning of all of this. And, for all of my clients, and they will know this, right? I always explain to them, I was like, we have to get in lifting shape. You have to be in shape to lift. And I don't even pull down the accessory intensity until like a week and a half out. I'm like, no, you should still be pushing this all the way into the meet, because if we pull this out too early, you're going to detrain, and then the chances of you getting hurt rise precipitously. So understanding that, like, this GPP is your shield. This GPP is what keeps you safe. And if you don't have that, and I guess it's not technically GPP, and in some cases it is GPP because it's, using accessories, but a lot of the times it's SPP, right? Because it's using, that dynamic effort to backfill in some kind of work capacity so that they can recover from this heavier stuff. And people have complained to me all the time, but it always works. And so I don't care that they're complaining. Is like, there's this 18-week deadlift progression that I do with a lot of people. And it'll be like a top set of 5 RPE 8 week 1. And then week 2 we'll go to 12 triples at 65% of that top set of 5 the following week, every 45 seconds. And then it's top set of 5 at 9, top set of 5 at 10, whatever. And then it'll be like, 12 triples, and then it might be 10 triples, and it might be 8 triples or whatever. And they're always like, dude, the dynamic effort days are so much harder than the max effort days. And I'm like, but that's what's going to give us specific physical preparedness, and it's going to give us the resilience and the work capacity to be able to actually peak into a meet. Because if you have this super intense stimulus at the end of prep and you can't recover from it in time for the meet, then when we think about that stimulus recovery adaptation, we've had the stimulus, we have the recovery, but then we have not been able to recover enough to arrive in super compensation. We've just arrived back at baseline, which is why you see these people all the time not peak in a meet. It's like, because you weren't able to recover from that last heavy stimulus because you were conditioned.
So if we go back to what you're saying with the dynamic effort, the question that popped into my mind is, when you're working with somebody online, how do you teach them what compensatory acceleration is, or to put maximum force into the bar? Because if you have 65% for 8 sets of 2, even if it's every minute on the minute, that can be done a multitude of different ways, right? It can be done where there's just that 65% of effort, or it can be 100% of effort being put into that.
Yeah.
And the training effect of that's vastly different between the two.
100%. Yeah. So how I explain it to them is every single rep from your warm up to your top set on pretty much everything, on the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift, has to have maximum voluntary contraction. You have to throw it through the ceiling. There is no circumstance in which you are not allowed to do that. So compensatory acceleration for them is the underpinning of everything that they do with the bar in their hands or on their back. Mm-hmm. And I tell them, and I was like, because you're either training your body to move fast, and then when it gets hard enough, you strain, or you're training your body to move slow, and then when it gets hard enough that you have to strain, you're not in a good enough position, or you haven't recruited enough muscle fibers in order to be able to do that, right? And so I was like, that compensatory acceleration, and I always talk to them about like the Fred Hatfield thing, where it's like, listen, if you have a 5x5 and you only tried 100% on 6 of those reps, you had 6 working reps. You didn't have 25. So you wasted 19 reps. It literally didn't do anything. I don't want to say it didn't do anything. It just was a lower training stimulus relative to the 6 that you actually had to try. So for them, I'm like, you have to be, it's like you're ripping the head off of a lion. It has to be the most violent and aggressive thing you've done within the constraints of the technique that we know is good.
Yes. So as that disseminates through the whole training workout, right? That would be true with top movement, like main movement. It might be true with secondary movement. Now, when you get into the accessory movements, what are your thoughts there?
So I always like
the lat pull, for instance.
Yeah. So what I always like to explain it to people is, a lot of the times, and my clients can attest to this, is I use a lot of tempo on things. And the idea is, listen, we've trained your capacity to be quick, but now if we can get the same stimulus with a little bit lighter load, and you're figuring out how to contract effectively, right? Longer pauses or whatever, that gives us this additional runway of progression where it's like, as long as you're feeling it in the target muscle and you have a high degree of repeatability rep to rep in terms of what it looks like visually, that's a good set. But it can't be herky-jerky, da-da-da-da. And there's some exercises, right? Like on JM press, you kind of have to muscle fuck it. But, on things like a lat pull down, like, I don't want to see it, you know what I mean? Like, we can't be front levering to the bar. I was like, so as long as every rep looks about the same, as long as you're getting within a sufficient proximity of failure, and as long as you're not dumping into muscles that we're not trying to train, that's a good set.
There's 2 thoughts that go into this, and when you're younger, you're going to lean towards the muscle fucking everything, right? But I don't think that's the right way, So, and the reason why did my sound just go out? No, you still got me? Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. No, I'm good. The reason why I try to steer most people away from that is, if we can say, from the strength carryover standpoint, both are equal, like more controlled, not controlled, because neither one of those two really are going to yield this dynamic correspondence to the main lifts, right? Yes, to a degree, but to a very small degree. So if we agree that they're both kind of the same, one of them is going to require more effort to recover from.
Yes.
Right? Because it's a way heavier load. The other one doesn't. right? So you're already doing all this other stuff in this training session, which creates an environment that has to be recovered from.
Yeah.
Right. So these downstream things that are either for hypertrophy or a multitude of other reasons, structural integrity, all these other type of things, then if it is something that's got like a JM press, it's kind of like a half range of motion, right? It's really hard to not muscle fuck things that are half range of motion, right? But when it's a full range of motion, you can always, the advice I give them is don't start with momentum, right? Just start with the muscular contraction.
Yeah.
Like it's a lat pull down, like contract the lats, grip the bar, then pull from there, right? That alleviates that jerky bullshit from the start.
Yeah.
And kind of fixes the tempo moving forward, or you can just tempo it out.
Yeah.
So they know that that's one way as well. And then you have the same correspondence, probably better,
yes,
right? But you don't have the recovery demands.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing too, right, is like when you look at this idea of like what causes resilience in people in general, and like what we know is, I can't remember the guy's name, but he trained Adam Archuleta, who is like that super famous safety that played for the Rams, and I think he went to the Redskins, but he was the guy where like he did all the crazy plyometric and isometric, like, his trainer had him do like a split squat iso for 5 minutes a leg, just like horrible stuff like that. But then the guy ran a 4.37, at 215 pounds, and he put up 31 reps at 225 at 215 pounds. He was a safety. He was super resilient, right? And so and they did a lot of stuff slow, and they did a lot of stuff without movement, because it builds a really, really high degree of co-contraction. It builds a really, really high degree of resilience in the tissues. And so it's like, dude, we're also going to get a hypertrophy benefit from that. And then we're also secondarily going to get a resilience benefit from that. So like, like I have a couple of people running right now, like they'll do tempo Bulgarians, and then they'll get to, 1 rep in reserve, they'll drop the dumbbells, and then they'll do an iso hold halfway down to failure. And it's like horrible. But it's like, dude, you only need to do 2 sets of that.
Yeah. Well, a lot of this also becomes movement specific, and the lats are the tricky one, right? Because let's take a pen lay row and compare it to a seated cable row.
Yeah.
Right. The pen lay row is probably not going to be done for hypertrophy. Yeah. It's going to be up, higher up the chain. Yeah. Like a secondary movement done for strength, because you're going to have to muscle fuck. There's no stretch position. Yeah. Right. It's a dead stop that you got to be able to go from. But if people are programming, and this is kind of the point I think we're trying to make here, if people are programming based upon muscle specificity, I do my squats, I do, my hinge movement, and then I do lats. Wrong answer. Like, what are the lats? What part of the lat? You know what I'm saying? Like, there is lats, which can be that hypertrophy that we're talking about, but why? Right? Yeah. Because if you're doing the low rows to build the start on your deadlift, probably a bad movement. Yeah. But you'll do that. But great for the lat activation for the other things that we're talking about. So they need to know why instead of the lats are a big one. Right. That's probably the biggest one. Everything else gets structured pretty well, but then it's like lat work. This is where Louis got really misunderstood. Like, we do lats every day. Yeah. We do lat type movements every day, but they're vastly different on what those actually look like when it's put in there.
Yes. Well, and it's this idea of, is it a purely hypertrophy exercise or is it a position builder? Right. So it's like, that pen lay row is going to be great for the starting position on the deadlift. In all actuality, it's probably kind of a butt cheek stimulus for your lats. Right. But it builds that exact position and the exact posture we're trying to improve on. And I would say in all actuality, it's probably not a super great lat movement. It's probably kind of a low back movement. Right. But just understanding that, like, and I think if a coach were to listen to this and there's one thing that they could take away, it's that the larger your toolbox and the more exercises for all of the muscles, the better you can serve someone in figuring out how to just build additional muscle or to build up the specific position. And it's like, I'll read these programs. A little while ago, I was doing these program audits where people would just send me in a program and I'd just respond to it. And I can't tell you how many times it'd be like 3x10 biceps, 3x10 triceps, 3x10 flies after they're pressing. And I'm like, okay, but where's your failure point where you're pressing? And like, are you wide grip? Are you narrow grip? Do you have a flat back? Do you have a high arch? Like all of these are going to stress different tissues, which means you have to build up resilience in different tissues. And there's no individuation paid to any of that. And they're like, well, I just know I need to do that. And it's like, okay, but there's 40 different pec exercises that you could pick from, and you pick chest flies. Why did you pick chest flies? Well, I don't know, because I don't enjoy my pecs. I was like, we can't, it's such a myopic way of thinking about things. And I'm like, you're leaving so much on the table because you're viewing it through a muscle first lens as opposed to a movement first lens.
Yes. What are the myths that are popular now? If this is like a debunking the myths.
Oh, God. You know what it is I've had this conversation with so many people lately, is this idea of, I've called it untested linear periodization, right? Where they'll finish a meet and they'll just start with a 5x5 at 60%. And I'm like, you do realize that you have just potentiated your nervous system to the most extreme degree you've ever done, because you've done it in a meet and you've also used a bunch of drugs to do it. Your nervous system is firing up. And in actuality, that post-meet window, you could continue with that nervous system potentiation to make a boatload of progress. You would just put additional constraints in place so that you can rebuild tendon capacity, et cetera, so you don't get hurt. But that's super valuable. Peaking is necessary in order for subsequent phases to build off of it. And like, what are we doing? Like you're when you finish a prep, you're likely kind of fat because your volume went down. You're definitely out of shape. And it's like, let's use that time to build that strain immediately. It may be in exercises with a higher degree of constraint, but let's get in shape. Let's lift heavy, because in actuality, like a lot of these untested guys, the reason why they can't lift heavy consistently is because they're out of shape, not because they can't lift heavy. It blows my mind, because I'm like, hold on a second. Like, steroids make you recover better, not worse. Your aerobic system will determine recovery ultimately. And it's like, if you just have a sufficiently developed aerobic system, right? It's like, you look at Griffin, the guy's in great shape. He can recover from a boatload of work. And I've seen his old programs. He did a boatload of stuff for a long time, and he was completely fine because he was in great shape. Right. And he totaled 2155, with a 400 kilo deadlift conventional. So it's, this idea of, oh, well, we can't do too much because we're on drugs. It's like, that's kind of a cop out, right? Like you should, if the Soviets won all of these gold medals in all of these different sports taking drugs, and they were training all of the, 13 times a week, 14 times a week, like I'm sure you can figure out how to lift heavy consistently in one specific discipline, which is being strong.
One thing I've always wondered with that is, was their dose at the same level of a lot of people's dose that we see today, the Soviets? No. And I would say absolutely not. That would be my hypothetical guess.
Well, and then that leads into the next point. And if there was another myth busting, as an allegory, or as an adjunct rather, is just people going way too hard with drugs, right? It's like, because at some point there is going to be, because you have such a dramatically increased degree of, rate of force development, motor unit recruitment, all these things that cause central nervous system fatigue, it does eventually start to become laborious to recover from. But if you're not that supraphysiologic in your doses, that's not that extreme, right? It might be beyond baseline, but it should not be that extreme, right? It's like, if your off season is on TRT and then you start magically taking 2 grams of testosterone when you start your meet prep, of course you're going to have issues with recovery, because you've gone from 200 to 2000. You've 10x'd it. Of course you don't feel good, because there's all those like we were talking about earlier, the secondary downstream consequences in terms of inflammation. And then you're not prepared for that amount of fatigue, because your muscle is contracting so much harder than it is before. And it's just like, there's nothing to say that you have to do more drugs than you did for your last meet prep. There's nothing to say that you have to do a bunch of drugs for meet prep, right? Like, my best prep came on my least total, like my least drug load that I'd ever done. Ever.
Were you in better shape?
And I was in really good shape. I was hitting hitting a heavy max effort every week. I was pushing on my max effort. I was pushing on my accessories, and I was big. You know, I was 278 pounds 2 weeks out of the meet, and I was in pretty good shape. And I was taking maybe 500 milligrams of total stuff.
Yeah, the difference there is your body chemistry was in a better environment to get maximal benefit out of what you were using. Where, say, in the past, you know, your body chemistry and your body is not in the position to be able to get the maximal out of what you're taking. Mm-hmm. Thus, you take more.
100%.
Right? And that's the compensate. That's how that plays out, to where the better the environment that the shit's going into, mm-hmm. the better it's going to work, but mm-hmm. the better it's going to work at lower doses.
100%. And it's like, and I always tell people this too. I was like, because I've talked to clients, untested clients all the time out of taking more stuff all the time. I'm like, don't do it. And I'm like, if drugs were the difference maker in terms of you being strong, why do you think there's drug tested guys totaling almost 2K at 181? I was like, if drugs were the difference maker, why are they able to do that? And it's not like they're these guys, they're like kind of drug tested and doing untested meat. It's like, no, this kid's on the USAPL testing database. He's being tested at 6 o'clock in the morning, 14 times a year. Right. And he's 22 years old. Mm-hmm. It's like drugs aren't the difference maker. Drugs are an adjunct. You know, drugs are something that can add into that protocol. But people get so myopic in terms of strength development. It's like, no, you need to be fit. You need to have a healthy and varied diet. You need to focus on reducing systemic inflammation so that you can recover from training, because training is also going to cause inflammation, right? You need to focus on having good blood pressure. You need to focus on having good gut health, right? And all of these things together, right? It's like, it's the total output is, you know, it's not 5 + 5 = 10. It's 5 + 5 = 50. And it's become so common. And I mean, I know where it came from, because you feel crazy when you're on a bunch. So you're like, well, I guess this is working. But it's like there's so many secondary negative consequences to doing that from a health perspective, that it's like you've added 20 here and you've taken away 19.
Yes. Well, it's a difference between it being an additional component to a multiplier. Mm-hmm. Right. So the additional, like 1 + 1 = 2. Yeah. You know, the multiplier, you know, 2 × 2 is 4. Yeah. Not two different numbers, you know. Yeah. 2, 2, 2. Yeah. Right. And and that's the biggest difference with all that. And when it happens a lot, right? Because that's just kind of the arc it went through.
100%.
Right. So when it first originated, I mean, we're going way back with that, but say when the 70s powerlifters first originated, they were eating way healthier than what happened 20 years later, right? So that now it's kind of restoring, you know, with all that. Why do you think, on a different topic, why do you think the SBD training has become as popularized as it is?
Because the best female powerlifter in the world does it. Agata Sitko does it. She does like 6 or 7 SBD sessions a week, and she's the best ever.
Hey guys, if you're enjoying what you're watching, make sure to take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe.
Right. And there are people who have gotten to a very high level of drug tested powerlifting who, with a high degree of frequency, train like that. And, you know, it might not be full SBD. It might be a squat and a bench session, you know, but, you know, I've seen plenty of people get to an extreme level of strength with stuff like that. And it's one of those things where I was actually having this conversation with Tom yesterday, is I think when it comes to pushing the needle, and not necessarily pushing the needle, but when it comes to trying out and experimenting and finding new things, the drug tested side recently has far surpassed the untested side. They are finding different and unique and new things that work. And it's very common. It's a very common trope in untested, where people will be like, oh, well, that's so silly. It's like, okay, but the ends justify the means here. Like there is a copious amount of evidence to support that, whether or not it's optimal, that these things absolutely do work. Would they need to be modified for someone who's untested because it's too much total stimulus, definitely. But they do work. And I had a lifter for a long time. His name was Alex Charchuk, and he totaled 2050 at 242. And he was like he's a submasters guy. I think he might actually be masters now, but he was doing an SBD day in that prep where he totaled 2050 at 242. Because I was like, listen, like, I don't care about anything other than it working. And it worked, and it worked really well. And so I think there's a lot of new programming information and knowledge coming out, and a lot of that is coming on the drug tested side. And I think untested coaches are going to get left behind unless they start learning that stuff.
What I wonder is, decades ago, there was a occupation developed called occupational therapy.
Yeah.
Right. For people that working on factory lines, just repeatedly doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over. And they have issues, right? Because they're not doing anything outside of that one thing. So thus we have to create this occupational therapist to be able to kind of balance, the compensations that are being developed because of that. When all you're doing are those three things, repetitively over and over and over and over and over and over and over. The question that comes up in my mind first off is, for how long?
Yep, absolutely.
Right? Because that same movement pattern is just being drilled and drilled and drilled and drilled and drilled. And that doesn't mean it doesn't work, right? Because it will. To what cost?
Yes.
Right? And we'd have to go look at the longevity, of everybody that does that and compare that to the longevity of those that don't.
Yes.
But just in theory, that would make sense. You have this, working with Jordan, you have a very good understanding of how these movement patterns all play out.
Yes.
Can you explain that in a better way than I just did?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, what it comes down to is, it's like, why does a guy have a 3-year career in the NFL and then get hurt and leave? And why do some guys play? Why is Aaron Rodgers still playing? A lot of it's individual dependent, right? A lot of it is just your genetic makeup. And I think at the highest level, the people who are going to be good, we're going to be good, right? You're not going to you can't put lipstick on a pig. And I think if you, and it's this idea of like top-down periodization versus bottoms-up periodization, right? So like when you think about the Soviets, they had this top-down periodization where they'd have the perfect program. They put 10,000 people through it. If they made 5 world champions, that was sufficient. And I think a lot of this stuff is like, that is like SBD days consistently, that's a fucking meat grinder. But guess what? If you can recover from it, you're going to be a world champion. And I think for us, we think it's like, oh, well, like it should be more, longevity focus, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, we can't really be having that conversation if you're trying to be the best of all time. And so it's this idea of like, listen, performance and longevity sometimes have a confluence. A lot of the times at the really highest levels, they're completely disparate, right? When you look at trying to be the best ever, it's like, dude, it's gonna fucking hurt and it's gonna fuck you up and you're gonna be beat up, right? We talked about our injuries before this, and so it's like, I don't know what the timeline is. I think the timeline is highly individual dependent. Is honestly like based on genetic makeup, and I think the best are going to be the best, and I think they're going to gravitate towards whatever system works best. And I think it's And this is where I've become a lot less dogmatic about programming as I've gotten older, is people look at what the best do and they're like, that must be the way to train. And it's like, no, dude, like that guy was going to be the best anyways. Like he probably could have done anything. Like there was a kid that I played football with in college. His name was Jackson Bennett. And I had a lot of disagreements, let's say, with my college strength conditioning coach. And in retrospect, I was just being a bullheaded kid. I didn't think it was ideal. I thought it was a suboptimal system. And he knew more than I did, which is why I thought that. And I didn't think it was great, but this kid, Jackson Bennett, he was fully bought into the system, which I think accounts for more than anything in terms of progress. He was completely bought into the system. And he played 9 years in the CFL, and he was a mutant. But he was Jackson Bennett. He was going to be the best because that's just who he was. That was his genetic makeup. And I think we get so consumed with, is X better or is Y better? It's like, dude, if there's some kind of scientific support or basis for it, and the athlete is bought in, it's probably going to work.
Yeah. The one pushback I have to that, but it's really not, is that's true. Right. And there comes a point of where the performance begins to slip, right? That's just training age, whatever you want to put in there. And when you get to that point where it starts to slip, there's a crossroads there. I mean, there's a lot of crossroads beforehand, but there's one there. And that crossroad that can hit, and this is across all sports, can be and you've seen this in the powerlifting mindset, you've seen it with everything, is that thought pattern can be, how can I last another 3-4 years? Or this might be my last. Yeah. Right. So the one that, and this should happen before the decrease happens, by the way, optimally. And because the one path of how can I make this be more of a quadrennial is everybody kind of falls into at the very beginning, but they don't realize it until they look back and say this was like a whole quadrennial, where that quadrennial is built to be able to last, you know, the extra 3 or 4 years. That other path of this could be my last goes down this really, really, can be a very dark path. Like, it doesn't matter what the fuck I do, right? Because this might be my last year. I'm going to take way more shit than I ever have. I'm going to do whatever it is to be able to get that one more year. But then that one more year, you made it. This one might be the next bad year, right? So if both of these people do end up making the additional 4 years, one's going to end up being fucked beyond belief. Where the other one's going to be able to not be as fucked up. I'd also say that the one that is just one more year left in the powerlifting side that I've seen don't ever really progress. They might get really close to where they were, but not. You know, maybe 5-10 pounds more, but the damage is way more. Than otherwise, where the other one strings out, it basically just looks at it as, what's this look like over a 3 or 4 year period? How does this kind of balance it out? It's way different. It's different mindsets entirely.
Well, and it's interesting you say that, because essentially what you're comparing is long-term athlete development to what you got to do to make it happen as a 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers. And I think when people look at SBD days, they're like, oh, well, I guess that's the way to train. But in actuality, that would be like, I always think about it in terms of like a reward. And you probably have to go through periods of lower frequency, having very specific technique and very efficient movement patterns for a long period of time, and have petered out the adaptation that sort of training will impart. And then you would move to something that's more specialized like that, with the understanding of this, you know, that kind of occupational therapy analogy, where it's like, this may cause issues, but this is what's necessary to get me to X. And so it's like, I think people see what the best do and they're like, well, I have to do that now. It's like, but what did their prior 8 years of training look like? Right? If you want to follow this chronological order, it's like they may have been doing this for 2.5 years, but the time preceding that they were not. Right? And you know, Agata, for example, has a beautiful bench, beautiful squat, beautiful deadlift. Everything is technically pristine. So for her, pushing that much frequency and that much volume, the system's perfect, or as close to perfect as you can get in a human body. Someone else who tries to do that, right? They have suboptimal technique, right? They have deviations rep to rep. It's like, that's where these issues start to come in.
Yeah, I think this can be summed up with, whatever you're doing, know what the potential pitfalls are. And know what the early warning signs are of those potential pitfalls. And have a plan for when they begin to expose themselves, right? Then that will get you those extra few years. Right? So she may be able to ride this all the way out, but at some point there's going to be those pitfalls.
Absolutely.
Right? And considering the level that she's at, she probably has a plan, you know, for when those start to expose themselves. They may already have, you know, what to be able to put in there to mitigate the potential pitfalls. Which on this just hit me like a ton of bricks. Maybe on the untested side, the reason why we see this is that's how they manage their drugs. right? Like, here's what I'm going to be taking. What are the potential side effects? What do I need to do to mitigate those side effects?
Yeah.
And then that carries over into the training.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And it's, you know, when I think about when you brought up that idea of like, well, this could be my last year. And I think that kind of harkens back, and we were talking about this idea of like, how do you make sure powerlifting is not your whole identity? And it's people with that sort of attitude. It's really sad because like powerlifting has become their whole identity. And then you see, and I'm sure you've trained with guys like this, where their entire personal life was a flaming ball of crap. Mm-hmm. And you're like, dude, if you had just been like, if you did what you needed to do to be successful, right? You ate the food, you did the hard training, but outside of that, like you had a life, you probably would have had another 5 years here. Yeah. You probably would have had another 6 years here. But it's this myopic, all consuming. And I was the same way in college, right? I was like, you know, I got all those concussions, and at no point was I like, maybe I should just let this one heal. I was like, oh, I played dinged up before. I'm fine. Like, I'm just going to do this, right? Like, you know, we were leading into playing at the Panda game, which is like the biggest Canadian college football game of the year, you know? And I was like, oh, I gotta play this game. I gotta dress in this game. And I nuked my brain. And it's like, until, you know, people won't open their eyes until the lightning licks them. Mm-hmm. And, it's really, really sad because you see people who could have, you know, a 10, 12, 14 year career, and it turns into 6 to 8. And it might not even be because of the consequences on their body, but because they were so all consumed and so myopic and so pushed towards that one goal that all this other stuff fell away. And then they had no support system to fall back on when things got hard.
Yeah. I was that, right? And I wasn't going to listen to anybody that fucking told me anything different. Mm-hmm. And then I surrounded myself with all the enablers to be able to do that. On the fortunate side, I did have the intelligence to know there has to be something to fall back because the sport doesn't pay anything, right? So the fallback plan just became, what do I have to do to be able to pay for the sport that I'm involved in? And I can say with certainty that if that was dialed, I think it's necessary. I will say that. I think it's necessary. But if it was dialed down just a little bit more, I would have had a couple more years for sure.
100%.
And less damage, you know, from that. But it's really hard. And you're finding this out now. If not, you will. It's really hard to have that conversation with somebody that's in that mindset that we're talking about. So the key thing is to remember you were there. Yeah. And then, you know, what stuck, and it's not really a matter of what sticks. It's the message has to be told hundreds, maybe thousands of times before it sticks. And you're just one piece. Yeah. You're just one message that's popped out that's adding up to the hundreds that have to be heard. Like, so no, they're not going to listen. No, they're not going to know. But over the years, hundreds of other people or hundreds of other conversations are going to have, then it happens. If you didn't take the time to put your one little stamp in there, then it doesn't build. Yeah. Right. Because a lot of people just, fuck it, it's just what it is. And then that's when it's really bad. Yes. That's when it's really bad, because that's when it's just, you know, crash and burn on the other end, you know, because not enough, too many people gave up, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, you can't give up, you know, and trying to put the message out, even though you know it's not really being received. Yeah. It's being received in the subconscious, just not in the conscious. At some point it will. Yeah. It may be too late, but sometimes it's not. Yeah. You know, we don't know. With your business, because the online training sphere has grown, right? And it's going to continue. It's changing, but it's always going to change. That's business. What are some of the things that you wish you knew when you say in 2020 is weird because there's a big jump, right? So let's exclude the pandemic and the jump that happened from that, because a lot of businesses grew just out of luck, right? Just the environment was there for that to be able to happen. Yeah. Once that drops, then the reality sets in. Yes. You know, for a lot of people. So you've been through that reality period. What do you wish you would have known? Actually, the first thing is you probably wish you would have known that it's going to drop because of that, right? Yeah. Then, so starting from that point, what do you wish you would have known then that you know now?
I think it's just this idea of just because the money's, I mean, you just said it, like just because the money's good now doesn't mean the money's always going to be good. And the health of a business is the monthly recurring revenue, and your bottom line is at the end of the day the only thing that matters. And if you don't have a system in place where you can consistently get leads in and convert those leads to clients and then keep those clients for a long period of time so that you have consistent monthly recurring revenue, you will not have the staying power to build a business that you're proud of.
Yeah.
That's all it comes down to. Is what it comes down to is I've seen so many people get into it and then quit it is because they were this flash in the pan. And the other thing is they didn't have the service set up to the point where it was a consistent, reliable source of income, right? Like people are always astounded when I tell them like our stay across the company in terms of, average clients is like almost 30 months, right? And like I looked at my roster last week. Of the 50 people I have, 11 have been with me for 5 years or longer. Because I built a relationship with them. I kept learning. I give good service, and I focused on what do they want to do now, right? Not forcing, hey, you have to do this. It's like, well, what do you want to do, man? Are you feeling kind of burnt out? Yeah, I don't really want to do a meet for the rest of the year. It's like, okay, well, let's just do something else. Let's do something fun. Okay, right? Like working with them, right? It's like, well, they're going to stay a client if you do that. But if you become super dogmatic and super myopic in terms of like, well, they have to do this and this is the system and X and Y and Z, it's like, they're not going to stay, dude. It's like, do you know how well I sleep at night knowing that, it's probably 2.5 years before someone starts to move on? Really well.
That can come with its own challenges though, because one big economic downturn, then you're fucked, right? Because you can become complacent.
Yes.
With that. So then the marketing's not going to be, and it's a weird spot to be in because you can't take new people.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So there's a scaling problem. Like if you can't take the new people, then you become compliant, then all of a sudden you lose 6 people.
Yep.
Huge financial drop.
Sure.
If it's individual. I mean, if you got coaches that's kind of where I'm going here.
Yeah.
There's different revenue streams to be able to kind of buffer. Right. I'm on a different end. I'm on a retail end. I got to have a lot of different revenue streams because one product's not going to sell next month. That might be selling this month. And it's just a big fucking mess of shit that has to be, managed and kind of boggled all through there. But how do you build in those buffers to prevent that from happening?
A big thing is we run referrals, right? So for us, like a lot of our acquisition is through referrals because we have such good service, right? And it's like, I always tell people, it's like, you should be getting like a fair few amount of referrals. Like whenever you ask for referrals, you should be getting a fair amount of people coming in, and those people are pre-selected. They're pre-qualified leads because this person who has been with you for 2, 3, 4 years has spoken super highly of you. Like that should be happening. And if we ask for referrals and we get nothing, that's kind of proof their service sucks. So it's always this service first mindset. And it's like, how do I lateralize within that approach? And it's like, it's just going to come back to, if you're giving good enough service, you're going to get referrals. And then if you're not getting referrals, how do you make service better? How do you continue to optimize that system of service delivery so that it's such an awesome experience that they're telling people about it without you asking them.
All right. So if we lean into that service side, when an online coach starts, I'm sure you're the same, you have to take anybody you can.
Yes.
Right. You have no other choice. Right. Then you want to streamline it because you want to work with people that is a good relationship for both sides. But those are 2 different models.
Yeah.
The first model is do whatever you can to get the roster built, right? Which some people never are able to achieve, right? Because they go about it in stupid fucking ways. But once that crest is hit, right? Let's say, and this is true when you were training clients in person. Like once that crest is hit, there's a decent number of people you'd rather not be working with, right? You do because it's your job. Right. But you'd rather not. So you kind of want to like phase them out, bring new people in to be able to have that build,
Yeah.
To where, I guess the question I'm asking is, you can get to that point and then start leaning into how to scale.
Yeah.
Right. But what I'm wondering is that the time, or is the time before you start to scale to get the client base that you actually want to work with 80% of all of it?
So I think it's a slow, like the easiest way to do it, if I were to give one piece of advice, is to pick out a 2.5 year timeline or a 2 year timeline and figure out what rate increases look like over that 2 year timeline. Right? Because when you're getting started, your price point's low because you have no social proof. And then it's like, once you get to that point, it's like, okay, now I have a boatload of social proof. I have testimonials XYZ. Right? And it's like when you were working with people in person, easiest way to get rid of a bad client, hey, January 1st rates are going up. Because subconsciously, and they know subconsciously in an interaction, it's like you're not having fun with them, but also similarly that they're not having fun with you.
Yeah.
So it gives them that out. And then you replace them back with a person at the higher price point. And the paradox of price is that the higher the price point, the better the client. The lower the price point, the worse the client. And so many people will ask me, it's like, do you struggle with these things, with your clients? I'm like, no. I love my clients. My clients are the best. I'm friends with a lot of my clients. I've had clients come from Australia to visit me and stay at my house. And I do that because I charge what I consider to be a fair market value for the service that I provide, and I build a relationship with them. And you're not going to get there unless you figure out what that rate increase looks like over time, because those crappy people are going to filter out. And as long as you have some kind of marketing or content or whatever to get leads in spite of that, you might have 50 at the beginning, you might have 50 at the end, but if your price point's $75 at the beginning and $500 at the end, it's like, okay, well, that was the scale up in revenue that you needed. And then to move beyond that, it's probably looking like, if you really want to go nuts with it, it's probably looking like you hiring other coaches and then, moving to coaching programs and, having spheres of proximity, all that other stuff, right, that well about. But yeah, it's always just going to be figuring out what that gradual linear increase in price is to kind of filter out the bad people.
I love that you said market value instead of value.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's one of the things that drives me crazy.
Yeah.
When just people speak in general, like, this is my value. Like, that's great. You can have your own personal value for whatever you want, but it's what the market's going to be willing to pay that really determines what that actually is.
Yeah.
Because I think with a lot of people that want to get into coaches, they get that kind of backwards. Like, this is what I'm worth. I'm like, actually, no, it's not. Because if it was, people would be paying it.
Yeah.
So maybe your price is too high for where you are at this time, or just know it's going to take way longer to grow, and probably not, because by the time you replace the one leaves, and you have to scramble to replace the next one. So you're never able to really be able to build from there.
Yeah. And I think the big thing too is there's a huge sense of entitlement in people moving into the online space. And it's much more common in people that have never worked in person, because when you first started working in person, like, what were you charging an hour?
$25 a half hour.
Right. And then by the end, what were you charging?
$75 a half hour.
Right. But you had to eat shit before you were afforded the opportunity to get to $75 an hour. And these kids want to come in, they're like, well, I have all this value. It's like, listen, man, you have a subscription to a powerlifting education library, and you're 21 years old. You've done 3 meets. You have no understanding of anything. You know about secondary to primary, tertiary timing on your squat and your bench and your deadlift. Name 5 unilateral quad exercises that aren't externally stabilized. Right? It's like, dude, you have no value. And like the hubris that I see, the hubris is ultimately what causes a lot of people to fail to break into the online space. It's like, no, dude, you kind of suck. Like, I sucked, right? I know that I sucked, which is why when I started in 2015, because I started getting paid in 2017, but I started in 2015, and there's just people at my, college's weightlifting club, and I was like, hey, can I program for you for free, and can you send me videos? Because I knew that I sucked.
It's a different landscape now, which I think is good, because it still happens today. I don't know if I'd say the majority today, but the majority many, many years ago of the people who were doing the online coaching were just doing the online coaching to be able to support their bodybuilding and powerlifting.
Yes.
It was just whatever extra shit they could so they could buy their drugs or extra food or supplements or whatever it was going to be. And that was the majority of it. And that's really the only people they had to compete with. Maybe they're like a Skip Hill. There might have been a couple that I would consider professional online coaches, not online coaches, hustlers to help support the sport that they're in.
Yes.
Right. And today there's way more professional online coaches, right?
Professional.
Well, I would say from that category, those people that are only doing it to help offset their costs,
I see what you're saying,
or they're competitive, don't have to just compete with them now. They have to compete with people like you guys. Right? The people that have been doing this for a long time, that have systems in place, that have communication systems in place, that have all these other systems in place to be able to service the client is way different than the guy that makes a post, gets a client, it's like, fuck, do I do this by email? Do I do it by DMs? Like, where the fuck are they supposed to send the shit? And they don't care. And, it ends up, so it's harder to make it. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
Right. Because the competition has increased. So if they're coming in, this is what they want to do. They have to see it. If they want to make it a career, they have to see it as a career. If they want to be successful at it, they can't see it as this side gig that's going to help offset their cost. It will still work, but it's never going to be the success that they want to try to emulate. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think it's, when it comes down to it, it's like, it doesn't become a career to them because they're not professional, right? Because they don't treat it like we both did in-person personal training. In in-person personal training, there are a certain number of continuing education units or continuing education credits necessary to maintain your certification every year. You have to do continuing education. There's nothing like that in online because there's not even a certificate required. The barrier to entry is 0. And because the barrier to entry is 0, and they've probably worked menial jobs before that, and they left those menial jobs because they didn't like them. They were like, oh, I can just sit at home and answer emails and text and I'll make my money that way. They don't know what being a professional looks like, right? They don't have systems in place. They don't have any of this stuff in the background, right? It's like they're getting cash out for their month of training. It's like, dude, do you not know how to send an invoice? No. It's like, why would someone take you seriously if it's like your personal email at gmail.com, right? It's like so-and-so at, so-and-so 420 at gmail.com. Hey, cash at me for this month's training. It's like, dude, you don't even take it seriously enough to have these things in place. Why would they take you seriously? That's why it's hard to break into, because you're competing with every other joker who doesn't take any of this seriously. Right? It's like the actual amount of people who have a good system in place, take things seriously, and are very regimented in what they do. In actuality, I would say that space isn't saturated at all. In terms of like the periphery of coaches who don't take it seriously and don't treat it like a career and aren't professional, I'd say there's a ton of competition in that market, but you don't even want to play in that market because the dollar value is lower.
Yeah. The one thing that's surprised me over this whole frame of the online coaching that hasn't happened is lawsuits for out of scope practice, right? Because a lot of online trainers are prescribing diets, right? Which in the States, you have to be a registered dietitian to be able to do that. Drugs, which is medical, right? Practicing without a license, and then rehab, which falls into that. I would have, and I probably have said it multiple times, that at some point in time, some of these people are going to start getting sued, for, out of scope. But it hasn't happened. So I don't know why. I don't know how that work around, why it hasn't happened. I just keep saying it, but it doesn't. It may be just the nature of the whole beast is still education. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think with things like that, right? Like when you look at, for instance, like diet, right? Like giving, because I remember like I did a deep dive on like the dietitian stuff. And I think it's like, you can give general dietary recommendations, but it can't be to diseased populations acting in the capacity, whatever, right? So, and then, you know,
like blood pressure's high because they're taking anabolics. Yeah. And you see where it gets gray.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like, oh, take this blood pressure med that you can get on the black market from some peptide supplier.
No, I mean, even trying to give them diet recommendations to be able to lower the blood pressure could be that gray area.
Because that's a diseased population.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And so it's, you know, it gets messy, but I think the reality is, like, for me, I've been very blessed that, one, my wife's a clinician, right? So once I get clinical impressions from her, because all of our clients, when they start with us, they go through an intake with her. She does an entire injury history, you know, entire medical history. She puts together their prehab, rehab. She'll list out contraindicated exercises based on whatever pathology they have. She'll list out, you know, and we'll chat with her about what a progression from contraindicated to them being able to do it looks like. And so it's like, okay, well, I have the clinical impressions. I know what rehab's supposed to look like. And then I'm not diagnosing shit. And, you know, and then on the hormonal side, right? Like there's a clinic that I work with where I just, anyone who's in America and, you know, they're within, you know, the states that they work in, I'm like, go see him, right? He's your guy. You know, because for me, it's like, one, I don't want to do those things because I'm not particularly skilled at them. Right? It's like there's actually just someone better than me.
Oh yeah.
And the goal is to get them better.
Yeah.
And there's an exchange of money that is necessary in order for you to get them better, but you don't want to just take more money as opposed to having them give that money to someone who's better suited to actually help them with that task.
Yes. Well, one of the things I found when I was the personal trainer is anytime I could offload the nutrition, the better it was for me. Because if they didn't lose weight, it wasn't my fault. You know what I'm saying? It's like, have you been following up with X?
Yeah.
You know, Allison was a dietitian. Have you been following up with Alan, who's a registered dietitian? Oh no, I haven't been. Okay, cool. All the metrics that we need to increase, they're going up. You know, so they can't bitch at me like I'm still fat because I didn't do the work that they're supposed to do. So it was a great thing for me.
Yeah.
Just from that standpoint, because at that time, that's what most of my clients wanted.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, you know, this 3 times a week coming in for a half hour probably isn't going to do much. What's the best way people can follow you? Find you? Yeah.
So it's Stu_Kodiak Barbell on Instagram. And then I have a YouTube channel, I think if you just type in Stu Kodiak Barbell, the YouTube channel comes up too.
Yeah. We'll put all the links in the description. Any final thoughts?
Powerlifting should be fun. If you make it into this huge Herculean task that causes the rest of your life to be a flaming ball of poop, you should probably reevaluate it and try to have fun.
That works. All right. With that, thank you for coming out.
All right.
We're done.
All content you see on this channel and at elitefts.com is created by, take a guess, Elite FTS. If you want to help support the content, head over to elitefts.com and pick up literally anything that you need to be able to get more jacked and strong.